Hey guys. This is part 7 of What If Naruto Perfected the Shadow Clone Jutsu. Hit like and subscribe if you like this one, and also please check the author in the description. Let's start. Chapter 25, The C-Rank Curse. Prank Day 170. Team 1 managed to go through the 2 D-ranked missions their sensei had chosen today in half the time they normally took, and Ebisu was kind enough to give them leave to prepare for their C-Rank instead of going back for a third mission. As such, the group split up shortly before 5, each going in their own direction. Naruto was headed straight to Ichiraku Ramen, to bolster himself against a long period without his favorite food, while Muramaru went directly home to prepare. The 3 Narutos would clearly see each other later today in the Iruka basement, but for now each had things to do, which was why Iruka was waiting in front of the academy, counting down the time before classes ended. She didn't have to wait long. "Hey, Jen and Bunny," Ringo said as she came out, the rest of the fashion club behind her. "Long time no see." "Hello girls," Iruka responded more calmly while Ichigo waved. "How goes?" The students looked at each other. "Could be worse, could be better," Fumishi replied with a shrug. "I can't wait until they find a more permanent replacement as taijutsu teacher," Mihoshi whined. "Having a different one every couple of days is a pain." The rest of the group nodded at that. "How about the new maths and history teacher?" the Genin clone asked. She, like all Naruto clones, had been informed of the man's treachery and disappearance. "You won't hear a complaint here," Mihoshi replied with a smile. "Same here," Fumichi added, echoing her fellow students' reaction. Rin-sensei's somewhat harsher than Kazuki was, but a much better teacher. Iruka forced down all the comments she had about how the man had treated Naruto, and how harsh he'd been. It was the past, and it should stay there. "Glad to hear that, at least," she finally answered. "So, what allows us the honor of seeing you here, on a Wednesday no less?" Nishi asked. "My team finished early, and we have the evening off," she explained, taking a deep breath. "Team 1 has a C-rank mission starting tomorrow." Mihoshi squealed and hugged her tight at those words. "Congratulations!" she exclaimed, and the rest of the group wasn't long in following suit. "Nice, you're progressing," Nishi said after a few moments of cheers and hugs. "What kind of mission is it?" "Career mission," Iruka replied. "Tell us everything you can," Ringo added. "Better yet," Fumichi said with a smile, "let's go get ourselves a table in a restaurant. We need to give our most advanced member a proper send-off." Here. The rest of the group replied. Iruka would last in the Iruka basements that day, talking for hours with the fashion club. Some of them would even have tips on what to bring or on things to look for, but even without that the female clone would have appreciated the gesture. It was nice having people behind you who cared. Prank Day 171. Ebisu was glad to see his entire team present at Konoha's East Gate, 5 minutes before 7. While lateness had never really been an issue with them, today was more important than any day before. Sure, they had leeway on their travel time, but it was always easier to start with a reputation for professionalism than to build back to one. "Good morning, team," he said as he stopped before his students. "I see everyone is ready to go," he said as he took out a sealed scroll. "This is the document we are to bring to Fumoto-cho, the closest town to our border with Yama no Kuni. Are they secret mission plans, or a treasure map of some sort?" Naruto asked, clearly intent on adventure. "Nothing so grand," the special Jonin replied. "These are answers to questions the lawman in Fumoto-cho had, along with orders, updates, and the like." Naruto's face fell. "Do not be disappointed. While this is clearly not the most important of documents, one must start somewhere. You wouldn't expect a capital dispatch to be given to improving ninjas, would you?" "No," the 3 answered. "There you have it," Ebisu replied. "Even if this is routine communication, treat it as if it were the most important decree of the Hokage. Outside these walls, you never know what can happen." "Aye," the team answered in chorus. The sensei took a good look at his 3 students. All seemed well prepared for the trip, holsters full and backpacks not too light or too heavy. "Any other questions before we depart?" Muramaru raised his hand. "How long do you expect the trip to take?" "At a good walk, we should arrive at our destination in 5 days, Ebisu answered. "With a day or 2 in Fumoto-cho and 5 days to return, that gives us 2 days of leeway in case of unexpected happenings." Muramaru nodded at that. "Have you ever done this specific mission before, sensei?" Iruka asked. Ebisu was about to answer when his watch beeped. 7 in the morning, time to go. "We'll discuss this on the way, if you don't mind." His female student nodded, shouldering her backpack as she turned. The two others did the same, and the group left the village for the first time. No, I have never done this specific mission, Ebisu replied once they were away from Konoha's gates. I became a genin before the Third Ninja War, and career missions near the border weren't given to genin then, when they were even given. I did, however, do quite a few of this type of mission, carrying messages back and forth to various other groups. Now, this was more dangerous, because, prank day 172, Konoha dodged back, narrowly evading a spike of rock that erupted right below his feet. The rest of the clones beside him spread out, only for a burst of wind to bring up a cloud of dust. The Dukeshi leader reacted instantly, and did a blind substitution straight up. That was a new variation of the technique the Naruto clones had developed in reaction to the rising skills of the new members of the Dukeshi. Some of the clones didn't react in time, they died instantly. Konoha himself did a second kawarimi, landing on the side of a tree, and waited for the dust to settle. With the rain, it wouldn't stay up long. When he could see the ground again, only a single person remained standing. Most people wouldn't be intimidated by her, but the Naruto clones had learned their lesson harshly. Kyuki Ikanju might be less than 1.5 meters in height, but she made up the difference in ferocity. Among Kyokuba, the new team, she was the close-range specialist. Surprisingly, she was the only one of the team that wasn't from ANBU itself. She was a medic, who'd wanted to be moved to a more active, i.e. less boring, position, and she had no problem in using the medical techniques she knew to cause horrible damage. When under her cherry-red mask with attached antennas, she went under the name of Seed. Konoha counted the leftover markers on the ground, proof of fallen clones. 5 more of them had succumbed, bringing their number down to 15. Of course, these losses didn't go unanswered. A rain of kunai and shurikens surged from the trees, going straight for the land-bound ninja. Konoha did nothing, expecting what would surely follow. He wasn't disappointed, as the weapons never reached her. A big boom rang through the area, and all the flying projectiles flew off course in the shockwave. Seed used the distraction to disappear, leaving only the fallen markers behind. A second later, a second explosion was heard, and one of the trees fell under the attack. One of the sources of projectiles, of course, Trunk's handiwork. The former male NBU was, surprisingly, the team's defensive specialist. Normally, people specializing in fire techniques weren't much for defense, but Sorero Ikiai wasn't anything near normal. Almost 2.5 meters tall, he towered over near everybody, and was so talented in causing explosions that he could and did annul attacks with them. He was the one who wore a sun-yellow mask with a lion's mane attached to it. A single clone managed to land safely after dropping from his fallen perch, only to disappear a second later. Konoha caught a flash of antlers, clear indicators of Root's presence. Born Kan Neko, he was the closest thing to an assassin in the group. He was somehow as comfortable underground as above, and was very good at erasing his presence. Forgetting to account for him was a mistake you didn't do twice, as he could attack from ambush like nobody else. The Dukeshi leader summoned another wave of Kage Bunshin, then did a trio of switches in quick succession. With the rains serving as radar for Flower, the new clones were quickly found and dispatched, mainly with more explosions. The clone leader had no choice but to continue on that route, as the flagging numbers of his team forced him into summoning more clones and moving after each wave. The battle quickly became a stalemate, with either side having the upper hand. The alarm rang after 10 more minutes of jockeying for advantage. The few remaining clones dropped out of their hiding places, while the 4 Kyokuba members did the same. Flower rose from the middle of a pond that didn't look like it could hide a fish, and Root rose beside her. "You're getting better at that, Flower," he said. Her nickname had stuck. The woman sighed deeply. "I couldn't have managed 2 more minutes of this. Between the stealth jutsu, my rain sense, and manipulating the puddle to give targeting indications, I was just about to fall unconscious." "None of that," Seed said with a growl. "I'm the one who'll have to deal with you if you fall from chakra exhaustion, and after last time I will make you regret it, mark my words." Trunks simply grunted in agreement. Hi, Flower replied, clearly too tired to argue. "Fall into position," Konoha ordered, and the 4 Kyokuba members stood at the ready before him. "Great work, team." Another test passed. "You're one step closer to being full Dukeshi." That's what Konoha had been doing for the past week. After discussions with Jiraiya and the Sandaime, he'd come up with a number of scenarios the new Dukeshi should be able to complete. Rescue missions, captures, scouting, invasion, countering. They'd gone through 15 different tests to make sure they'd be able to work properly together in all situations, and they'd all passed with flying colors. Everyone nodded save Flower, who fell on herself. And how many are left? She said, tiredness evident in her voice. Kyuha had been waiting for that one question. The other times he'd been asked this, his answer had always been a few. And he could see in everyone's face that this was what they were expecting. As such, he answered differently. None. What? Flower replied, eyes growing wide. And she wasn't the only one to react. There are no more tests, Kyuha said, waving for them to follow. You've proven your ability to work together well in all situations. Now, all that's left is mastering the kinjutsu that make the Dakeshi such a danger on the battlefield, and that make us an endless army in combat. Silence answered him. He clearly had the group's complete attention. He pointed down toward one of the caves. Go inside. Everyone did so. The place wasn't one of the Uruhara pathways, but a new base the Naruto clones had built with Jiraiya's teachings and help. It was somewhat far from Konoha, being more than 20 kilometers away, but the Hokage was planning on a second base being built in the village itself. For the moment, this was perfect as a training area. Inside, a dozen clones were waiting, scrolls at the ready. They split into 4 groups and waited. Now, the first technique you'll learn today is the most important, and the one that'll be used the most, Kyuha explained. Like all jutsu you'll learn today, this technique is only to be used by clones and never by flesh and blood ninja. In humans, it has side effects that'll end your ninja career in months if not sooner. Clones, demonstrate. One of the clones stepped forward and bowed. He then did a few hand seals, then slapped a glowing hand on the floor. As you can see, the technique drains chakra, the Dakeshi leader continued. It affects everything, trees, seals, people, and even nature itself. With it, one of the main flaws of the Kage Bunshin, their limited chakra reserves, can be easily dealt with. I'm pretty sure everyone here can understand the implications. Everyone nodded. Seed did so hard enough that Kyuha was afraid she'd broken something. Now split up. The clones will teach each of you individually, and we'll move to the next technique once you've mastered this one. It didn't take long for each Kyokuba member to join his trio of Dakeshi clones, calling a shadow clone as they did so. Even Flower managed to summon a Bunshin regardless of her exhaustion, interested as she was. Kyuha smiled. His team was growing well and fast. Prank day 174. Thank you, come again, Sho said as the 2 peasants left in a hurry after their purchase. The merchant clones sighed after they were gone. Again, they hadn't learned a thing. The place hadn't been open long. They were only on their 4th day of business. Not that they had much. The Torisan had been clear that this place wasn't a healthy city, and that could be seen in the habits of their clients, especially compared to those of the people in other cities. Here, in San no Kuni, they had very little business. Nobody ever came alone, always in pairs or more, and never while there was any other client in the shop. There was no arguing, no window shopping, no haggling, just enough words to order things, if there was even that. And when they left, the clients ran like the fires of hell were after them, sometimes not even waiting for their change. Clearly, nothing good. Unfortunately, that made it so that they could barely gather any information. There weren't any rumors going around, mainly because no one was talking, which meant they weren't of much help. Sho was about to sigh again when the bell attached to the door rang once more. Welcome to Kuroneko, he said, looking at the pair who just entered. He then forced himself not to tense. Between the fashion group's teaching and Jiraiya's training, the Naruto clones had gotten pretty talented at reading people. And the 2 civilians who'd come inside rang alarms. As usual, it was a man and a woman, but they weren't like the ordinary clients. The man wore a sword at his belt like he knew how to use it. He wasn't the first to come with a weapon, but the others who'd entered armed clearly had them on only to comfort themselves. This guy was visibly ready to draw at any moment, and the clothes he wore did nothing to hide the fact that he was a warrior. Loose clothes that wouldn't hamper movement, good quality sandals, hints of something rigid under his shirt. Even without the fact that he was looking everywhere as if seeking sources of danger, Sho would bet his life he was a bodyguard. The woman was no better. First, she wore a kimono, which was the first he saw in this place outside the Lord's mansion, with a purse hanging to the side without care. In other places, that would have seemed normal, but here it was another first. He even detected a hint of perfume. It was more than suspicious. Good day, shopkeeper, she said, bowing very slightly. Am I speaking to the owner of this place? You are. Another first. Nobody had asked this question before in this building. Good, good, she looked around, stopping when her eyes fell upon the stacked bottles of alcohol behind the counter. What alcohol selection do you have? Sho recited his stock from memory. With the small number of sales he'd done, there was nothing he'd lack stock of. How about 5 barrels of rice country sake? She asked. Of course, he replied automatically. Inside, he was goggling. 5 barrels? Even if that was the only suspicious action she'd taken, it would have been enough. His biggest sale had been 3 bottles, and this was more than an order of magnitude greater. He then turned to the bodyguard. Does Mr. need anything? He caught a hint of a scowl before the woman smothered it. He won't be taking anything. The man just grunted. I see, he said, tallying the price. She paid without argument, something that raised alarms since he'd put a good 30% markup compared to the normal price, and she didn't even react. He'd expected an argument at the very least. Will you be taking it with you, or will you need it delivered? Sho asked. The woman shook her head. No need for delivery. I'll have someone come get them. Your receipt, then, he said, handing her the paper. She grabbed it and tucked it in her purse without looking. Pleasure doing business with you. Come again, he said, waving. As soon as the door closed behind them, however, he did the cross seal of the Kagebunshin and informed the other members of the network of what had just happened. He was pretty sure there would be a cat or dog trailing them in the next few minutes. He then set himself to wait. Rare was when they had 2 sets of customers, one right after the other, and 3 had never happened. He probably had at least a good 30 minutes before anything else happened. Maybe he could find a way to train that wouldn't be immediately visible. Prank Day 175. By the afternoon of the 5th day, Team 1 had left the main thoroughfares for smaller roads, those being wide enough for only a single cart to pass. The land was getting bumpier, and the ground less maintained, while dense forests surrounded them on both sides. And, after a good 2 hours' march on said road, the group arrived in Fumoto-cho at last. That's the city we were waiting for? Naruto said, turning toward his sensei. It's barely bigger than a village. Muramura had to admit Naruto was right. The place, from what they could see, was only somewhat bigger than the roadside villages they'd passed on the way. One could see farms just off the main road, and there were very few businesses on the main street. The only one that drew attention was an inn barely a block away, as it was the tallest building in sight. Indeed, this is where our mission leads, Ebisu replied. While I will agree it is much less populated than Konoha or other such towns, it is still the biggest city in the region. As such, this is the place where the region's administration is concentrated. He looked around. The few people in the street flinched as his team's eyes went over them. The teacher then turned toward his students. Unfortunately, there will be no training while we are in Fumoto-cho. While larger cities tend to have no issues with ninja due to seeing them more frequently, remote places like this tend to have superstitions regarding our presence. We tend to be associated with death, and that simple fact makes the common man fear us. No need to pour oil over the fire by openly practicing ninjutsu. Hi, his 3 students answered. Fact was, they didn't mind too much. Ebisu had used the 5 days on the road to teach the group a number of low-level ninjutsu that were useful for a ninja on mission. Nothing one would use in combat, but rather small techniques that made life easier. A jutsu to purify water, another to create heatless light, one to blow away dust and remove tracks. All sorts of useful things that made life outside cities easier. Now, while we camped outside the last few nights, we will be staying in an inn tonight, their sensei said, pointing forward at said building. Please remember that you are still on mission, and that you are representing Konoha. As such, no pranks, fooling around or anything of the sort. Hi, the trio repeated, following their teacher. The inn was basically the same thing the many Narutos had seen all over the continent, a bar with tables on the first floor, and a staircase leading to rooms on the second. The place was actually quite clean, compared to the many other examples the Narutos had seen, which boded well. Hello, hello, the old man behind the counter said as the 4 came in. Then his eyes went wide. Shinobi-san! He exclaimed while bowing. It has been a long time since any shinobi stayed at my humble inn. Welcome to the bottom of the hill, sirs, miss. No need to bow before our group, innkeeper, Ebisu replied as he stepped forward. We are simply travelers. Tell me, do you have any rooms you might rent us? This is not the busy season, Shinobi-san, the innkeeper answered. All my rooms are open. How many would you need? 2, please. The old man grabbed a few keys from behind the bar. Please follow me. The civilian stepped out from his workstation, doing a bizarre clacking sound at every step. As he came out from behind the bar, the 3 genin couldn't help but stare. The man had a wooden leg, eyes front. Ebisu whispered harshly, and unfortunately too late. The old man stopped, realizing he was being stared at. He then smiled. No worries, he said. Everyone stares at first. I'm more than used to it. What happened? Muramura asked. Well, when I was younger, I was a somewhat skilled hunter, the man explained as everyone walked upstairs. One winter, however, while I was coming back from a hunt, a starving wolf decided that what I'd caught was exactly what he needed. He took me by surprise, and we fought for a while. I ended up killing him, but by that time the wolf had taken a big bite out of my leg. I made it back to the city, but by that time my leg had gotten infected. It was beyond the skills the resident healer, so she cut my leg just below the knee to save me. I carved this leg while I was recuperating in bed, and I've been walking on it ever since. He stopped, and pointed to the rooms on the opposite sides of the corridor. These are yours. 2 beds in each. Supper is included and at 6 tonight. How many nights will you need? 1 should be enough, Ebisu replied. Please pay at supper then, the innkeeper said, walking back toward the bar. I'll leave you to your things then. 1 last detail, if you will? Ebisu asked. Yes? Where could I find the person in charge of this city? The special Jonin said. Old man Chaochu? The innkeeper replied, stopping. 4 houses down, on the other side of the street. You can't miss it, it's the only place with 2 floors outside the inn. He paused for a moment. It's been a while since I've seen the man, though, and usually he comes every evening. He might not be in. Where could we find him, then? Their sensei asked. He might be in one of the smaller towns around here, or in one of the surrounding farms, the old man mused. Outside of that, no clue. Thank you, Ebisu said with a small bow. No need, the old man replied, walking away once more. Just happy to have business. The innkeeper had said it true. The lawman in charge was absent when the team visited, and no one had any clue where he might be found. Between training and missions, Sasuke didn't find much time to look into the mystery that was Naruto's graduation. Kakashi could be a slave driver when he was actually training people, and on some days he couldn't help but fall directly into bed after the team disbanded. Still, he did what he could to listen for whatever was happening in Konoha, hoping for more information. Unfortunately, he missed the days directly after the invasion, when the news was fresh, and very little could currently be heard about his blonde classmate since, as he'd found out, the boy was outside the village on his first C rank. Luckily, after a few weeks, he finally got the opportunity he was waiting for. Kakashi had finished the training early, since he needed to accompany Sakura for Mednin testing, while Sakaki had a training bout with Rock Lee, who he saw as a rival. That left him with all the time in the world to go directly to the best source of information, Yumino Iruka. This wasn't the first time he tried to talk to his former teacher, but the man had been absent repeatedly. It seemed that some days he left the academy at the same time as the students, only to reappear home hours later. This time, however, he was there right as classes ended, pushing his way in while all the students did the opposite. Finding Iruka's office wasn't an issue, as he hadn't moved in the past year, so Sasuke went straight there and knocked. Come in. The genin did so, seeing his former teacher for the first time in months. He wasn't sure, but Yumino Iruka seemed in better shape than he'd remembered from his classes with the man. Perhaps the rumors of intense training were true. It would explain the absences, also. Good day, Yumino-san. Uchiha Sasuke, the man said, rising and extending his hand. Sasuke saw no reason not to shake. I don't see former students often. What can I do for you? He said, indicating an empty chair. Sasuke sat down in the offered seat. I seek information, he said. Just to confirm, Naruto was promoted to genin, correct? Yes, the teacher replied. Him along with 2 members of the latest class. Did they get the authorization to take the exams early? Iruka shook his head. Then, how did they get promoted? It ate him a little inside that Naruto had found a way to bypass the exams. If he could have started earlier, he'd be that much closer to his brother, he was sure. Iruka took a deep breath. What do you know about the invasion? He asked. Not much, Sasuke admitted. Most people were reluctant to talk much about it, after all the losses. I know that it was Sand and the new village Sound against Konoha, and that Sand surrendered while Sound was beaten back. I don't know most of the details. Okay, the teacher said, preparing himself in his mind. There were multiple hot spots during the invasion, the walls, the summoned snakes, the hospital, but the most important was the stadium, where the last round of the Chunin exams was happening. Sasuke interjected. Exactly, Iruka replied. The reason was clear. That was where the Hokage was, and he was one of the main targets of the attack. Now, the invaders were well prepared, with a sleeping genjutsu over the entirety of the stadium and infiltrators all over the place. I was there myself, with Naruto, and everyone was caught completely by surprise. Sasuke's eyes focused. While he agreed the Iruka was a good teacher, Sasuke wouldn't expect the Chunin to come out undamaged out of such an attack. He thought the man had been far from the fighting. Continue. I can't say everything that happened in that arena with all the fighting, the Chunin explained. But one thing was clear, Naruto filled the place with as many shadow clones as he could, taking the fight to the infiltrators. They died in droves, but that way they kept leaf losses to a minimum. Shadow clones? Sasuke asked. Think regular clones, only with the ability to affect reality. Not any more solid, but they can still fight and use techniques. Sasuke nodded at that. Now I ended up escorting some members of the nobility to a shelter, so I missed the end of the battle, but I've heard that it was Naruto that broke the jutsu that held the Hokage prisoner, which forced Orochimaru to retreat. The Uchiha Genin couldn't believe it. Dead last, saving the Hokage? That was preposterous. He had to agree, though, that this was the kind of action that deserved promotion. What about the others? Iruka continued. Muramaru, the boy in Naruto's team, reputedly saved the Hokage's life while also helping civilians to safety, while Joden Ariko, the girl, took out 10 or so enemies of higher rank, and also assisted the Hokage in his battle. The fangirl, with 10 kills? He couldn't believe it. But Naruto's exploit was even less believable. How could Naruto have? Iruka interrupted him. Did you ever see Naruto shy from combat? Sasuke couldn't say he did. The blonde boy had many flaws, but fearful had never been one of them. Still, he was dead last. How? What makes you say he was dead last? Iruka asked. Everyone said so. Even the teachers. Then, I have an exercise for you, one that should help become a better ninja, Iruka said with a smile. You had top marks in memory exercises, so you clearly remember information well. Ignore what everyone said about Naruto, and focus on what you saw and lived through. How would you rate him, using only that? Sasuke sat down and thought. Bottom of the class in maths and history. He remembered a few of the exams the blonde had received. Can't use the clone, unreliable substitution. He's seen many examples of both, though he had to agree that he had memories of Naruto succeeding at the Kawarini. Average weapon throwing. Again, many examples. He then started scowling. Decent taijutsu. While Naruto's forms were horrible, the Uchiha had to agree that he was clearly above Sakura's level, and he'd had some victories against talented students like Sakaki. Very good transformation. Which were mainly used for pranks, but credit was due there. That's all I think. You're missing trap evasion, where Naruto is among the best in the class, but that's a valid evaluation, the Chunin replied. Now, taking all that into account, what would be your opinion? Now that he thought of it, the only things that really pushed Naruto down were his maths and history grades, which even he believed were overly represented in the exams at a third of the grade. Outside of that, with some good points and some bad ones, Naruto sounded pretty much average. Good, Iruka said. Making valid evaluations of allies and enemies is capital both in battle situations and not. Also, one should always reevaluate facts based on one's first-hand experiences. Also, there are facts that you are not aware of. Do tell. Some are not mine to tell, but I will tell you what is commonly known, the teacher said. Naruto had special issues that were not caught until recently, and was also the target of deliberate sabotage by at least 2 teachers. Unfortunately, with Kazuki's escape and the need to bring back the students whose last exam had been sabotaged, the manipulations in the academy hadn't stayed secret very long. Keeping things hidden in a ninja village when students were involved was nearly an impossibility. What? Iruka nodded somberly. I've gone over the numbers, and the Konoha analysts agree with me. Naruto should have scrapped a pass the first time he did the exam, had his notes not been tampered with. And he wasn't the only one. He didn't have words for it. The idea that a paper pusher might have managed to force him to fail, if he'd decided to do so? It made him sick to think about it. Were my own. No, the teacher countered. Your grades were untouched. The group who did this targeted mainly students of civilian families or orphans, people who had no resources to fall back on for shinobi subjects. That was another fact that had managed its way to the rumor mill. Sasuke was silent for a moment, then rose. Thank you, sensei, he said with a bow. He had to agree, he'd learned more than he'd thought coming here. I have much to think about, the teacher smiled. Don't be a stranger. Do come back. I think I will, the Uchiha replied. Good day, Yumino-san. Good day yourself, Uchiha-san. Walking outside, one thing stuck to mind. Sasuke agreed, things seen firsthand were the best source of information. As such, he'd have to see Naruto once he was back and test the blonde genin himself. Yes, that was the best way to go. Team 1 came back to the inn as the sun was coming down. As they had no indication that the lawman was even in the town itself, it was decided that the group would sup and sleep before starting the search the next day. The innkeeper clearly knew Shinobi. He gave the ninjas the table farthest from the door, back to the wall. He then delivered a complete roasted chicken with gravy and side dishes for the group. After a few days of travel rations, Naruto had to agree that it looked delicious. However, before they could even start eating, people started streaming in the inn, some going to the bar and some to tables. The old man and a boy, who they supposed was the cook, went back and forth brining food. Ignoring them, Naruto started on his own meal, only to be interrupted by Ariko. Are they all looking at us? Naruto turned around and noticed that yes, Ariko was right. Each and every person at the table was staring in their direction, eyes barely blinking. Even the people at the bar did the same, ignoring their glasses. Turning back to his team, Naruto shivered. Creepy. Ignore it, Ebisu said, seemingly unaffected. Reactions like this one are unfortunately common in isolated regions. This is actually not the worst case I've lived through. He then launched himself into a retelling of one of his missions deep in Fire Country. The people there had been even worse than the citizens of Fumoto-cho, blaming the passing ninjas for everything that had gone wrong in the last 2 years. It had gotten to the point where Ebisu's team faced a lynch mob, and only the fact that Ebisu's teammate Might Guy had been especially talented in knocking out adversaries instead of killing them had kept the situation from becoming a bloodbath. I get that, Miramara said, trying to ignore the looks. Still, it's disturbing. Ariko nodded, handing Ichibo a second carrot. Then, let us focus on something else, Ebisu said, putting his half-full glass of water at the center of the table, out of sight from the rest of the room. Look here. He did a pair of hand seals, then put his hands at both sides of the glass. Nothing happened. Was something supposed to happen, sensei? Ariko asked. No, the special Jonin replied. But watch this. He reached into his pockets, withdrawing a clear vial. Opening it, he let a single drop fall in the glass before putting back in its place. He then made the same set of hand seals once more, and this time, the glass shone clear blue when he put his hands on it. This jutsu has the following florid nickname, the Poison Taster's Nose, he explained. And it is a simple one that detects dangerous components in liquids. Ninjas and bodyguard missions use it regularly, and with experience one can even learn to identify what type of poison is inside based on the color of the light. Now your turn, he said, waving to the rest of the team. Each of the genin tried in turn, though none managed the technique that night. It did allow them to ignore the looks, at least. Prank Day 176. The 4 of them were down at breakfast, alone, thankfully, when a man entered the inn, coming straight for them. The genin all tensed for combat, but the man stopped a few feet from the table. He was clearly old, based on the wrinkles and white hair, but was still visibly in shape. He had the tan of a person who worked long hours in the sun, and had an air of authority along that. I heard you were looking for me, Shinobi-san? He said, turning toward Ebisu. You must be the lawman, I suppose? Indeed, he replied with a booming voice. I am Chujuru, and I've been placed in charge of this region by the Fire Daimyo. Call me Chaochu, everyone does. He looked at everyone. Now what can I do for you, sirs, miss? Ebisu stepped forward. We have a dispatch from Konoha for you, he said, withdrawing and handing the document. Chujiro waited no time, breaking the seal and quickly reading the missive. I see, he finally said. I have the requested documents in my office. Come with me, I'll get them for you. Team, follow! Ebisu ordered, and the 3 genin rose instantly. No need, the lawman quickly replied. My office is not big enough for all of you anyway. Ebisu thought for a moment, then turned to his team. Pack everything, he said. I want to leave as soon as I return. He made a signal offhand, one of the few he'd thought Team 1. Keep together. He had a bad feeling about this, somehow. The 3 genin did as ordered, gathering everything in their rooms. Miramara took Ebisu's backpack, and the 3 retreated in the 2 male genin had used last night. I'm not the only one who doesn't trust this, right? Miramara said. Nope, said both Ariko and Ichibo. Naruto shook his head. No, I didn't like this place from the moment we got here. Anyone getting flashbacks of San no Kuni? The clone network had already gotten a good number of updates from that region. Both clones nodded. There's clearly something wrong with the people. That level of silence for so long? Not possible. Miramara was about to reply when Ebisu's voice rang out. Team, to me. Let's go, Naruto said, rising. The 3 genin were halfway down the corridor when Ichibo whistled, before jumping intently. Ariko's eyes went wide, and she flicked 2 fingers at her nose. Rabbits speak for bizarre or uncommon smell. The three quickly took combat positions. I don't smell anything, Miramara said, and Naruto nodded in agreement. The innkeeper walked out of Ebisu's room. Your sensei's downstairs waiting, he said with a smile. Naruto saw something wrong in that smile, and dashed forward. What did you? He started, only to fall on his knees short of his target. Behind him, Ariko and Miramara fell to the ground, unconscious. You ninjas are all the same, He-Man said, no longer hiding his disdain. Always underestimating the weak. He tapped twice of his wooden leg for good measure. Naruto tried to grab the man, but he was losing strength too fast. He leapt face first to the ground, and could see no more. I love binary poisons, was the last thing Naruto heard before he blacked out. Chapter 26, Depravity. Prank Day 176. Naruto slowly came to. Everything was blurry and distorted, and even with his eyes open he couldn't make sense of things. Luckily it seemed like whatever was causing this was fading, as his sight started clearing up. He shook his head side to side, hoping it would help. Welcome back, he heard somewhat bizarrely. After a second of thought, he recognized Miramara's voice and turned in that direction. It didn't take long for the remaining fuzziness to clear up, and he moved his head around, trying to get a better grasp on the situation. His arms were stuck behind his back, clearly chained, and a look downward revealed his feet were restrained similarly. Also, surprisingly, his shirt had been taken off and paper seals had been placed all over his belly. What? He asked aloud. Yeah, Ariko replied, that was my first reaction too. She was chained on the opposite side of the room, right next to the other clone. You clearly went through a different treatment than we did, she continued, indicating her hands with a movement of her head. Her fingers had been taped together tightly in front of her, while her arms were chained with solid iron links which were bolted to the wall at her back. A quick look at Miramara revealed he'd gone through the same treatment. Naruto wriggled his fingers and found no obstructions. Any ideas why they didn't do the same with my own hands? He asked. No clue, Miramara replied. I can see seals on the chains at your feet, Ariko answered. Those on your arms are probably the same. I guess you're the one who got the special treatment, not us. Why would I? Naruto started. Oh yeah? Quibi. He normally didn't pay much attention to his tenant, but others might not do the same. The other two clones nodded in agreement. Probably, Miramara answered. There was a moment of silence. Well, anyway, we don't have time to lose, Naruto said. Any clue where we are? Ariko shook her head. None. By what I can remember, you were the last one who lost consciousness, and the both of us were already chained here when we woke up. What about Ichibo? The blonde asked. Ariko made a move with her head, indicating one of the corners of the room. Twisting so he could look in that direction, he noticed the rabbit standing in that corner, immobile. He was restrained as heavily as anybody else in this cell, and didn't react when his name was called. Is he okay? Naruto asked. I'm pretty sure he's still under the effect of what took us down, Ariko replied, a note of uncertainty creeping in her voice. Any clue what it was? Miramara added. Naruto thought back, trying to remember what had happened earlier. I think he said it was a poison of some sort. Poison? Miramara echoed, surprised. Aren't we clones immune to poison? That was at least the general idea, especially based on the clone's resistance to alcohol. That's what I thought also, Naruto replied. It's not like we tested that part, however. At those words, the two clones looked down. Believing themselves immune was dangerous, especially if they weren't. Anyway, Naruto continued. That's not important right now. What is getting out of here, and as soon as possible? And how are we going to do that? Miramara said, rattling his chains. We can't do hand seals. We barely have any leeway to move and we're chained to the very walls. Said walls were stone, and looked very sturdy. How can we manage that? Naruto nodded, face serious. Then, let's figure out what we can do without hand seals. Anything comes to mind? Well, Ariko said from her spot. There's already a few things. Mostly chakra exercises, but Hara Coil 3.4. Diaphragm Coil 3.1. Central Lung Coil 3.7. That and the sound of a quill on paper were the only things Ebisu could hear as he came to. Since he had no clue where he was, he did his best not to react in any way, keeping his eyes closed as he cast his mind back to how he'd gotten here. The last thing he remembered was following the lawman back to his office. He'd been on edge. He couldn't tell what, but some instinct was telling him things weren't as he'd suspected. Still, the lawman made no offensive move, leading him directly to his office and withdrawing the requested documents from his desk. The special Jonin remembered that he not even touched the documents, preferring to use a variation of the leaf-floating method to grab them. The first was what had been requested, and he'd fallen while reaching for the second. He couldn't think of anything else. "Welcome back to the land of the living, Ninja-san," a voice came from above. "I was starting to think you had an uncommon reaction to my poison. The antidote normally works much quicker." Ebisu could hear the smile in the man's voice. "Though I will suggest that you should train your body more, Ninja-san. I've rarely had a high-level ninja with such a weak body pass through my hands." Ebisu opened his eyes to find a man standing right above him. He had short white blonde hair that was slicked back and ended at his nape, along with a bizarre seal right in the middle of his forehead. He wore an open white lab coat with casual clothes underneath, nothing that especially drew attention. No, what immediately drew the eyes were the glasses he wore. Steel gray, they were nearly a half mask with how much of his face they covered. Also, one couldn't see his eyes through the lenses, and not because they were tinted. No, the effect was similar to a microscope, distorting the eye beneath. "I'm sorry, I haven't introduced myself," the man said cheerfully. "My name is Shinsei Shukuen, and this place is my very own lab." Ebisu tried rising, only to fail as bands of metal held him down. "What am I doing here?" he asked. "You are here to help the advancement of knowledge, of course," Shukuen replied with a smile, sounding as if such a thing was self-evident. "We don't get many Konoha shinobi here, but your fire nature will be perfect for many tests." The blonde's hands formed into seals. "Now, please stay still. We wouldn't want to generate invalid data, would we?" Ebisu's eyes went wide. "You're a ninja?" There had been no indication of such a thing, no Hittite, no weapons or armor. Not even the classic scars and other bodily consequences of shinobi life. "Never call me that," the man spat out, his cheerful demeanor vanishing in an instant. "I'm a chakra scientist, not one of those stupid brutes that care only about money and violence." He put his hand on the immobile Ebisu's throat, and paralyzed the special Jonin from the throat down. None of them care about research, progress, or anything like that. They only care about killing each other off. He stooped for a second. "There are exceptions, though, such as my own sensei. Thank the kami for them, or humanity would have killed itself off by now." It didn't take long for Ebisu to guess who the man's sensei was. "You work for Orochimaru," the special Jonin spat out accusingly. Shukuen didn't notice the tone. "Great man, isn't he?" he replied. "He might have started as a ninja, but he's really like me, a scientist at heart. He understands what's truly important, and that sacrifices have to be made in the name of science." He grabbed something to the side, and shoved it into Ebisu's mouth. He then tied it off solidly. MMPH. The special Jonin grunted, his words made incomprehensible by the plastic ball between his teeth. "I'm sorry, but I have to test your brain's pain response now. We need to have everything noted down before we proceed to the next batch of tests, you see." The scientist grabbed a bladed tool from a tray beside the table. "Now let's—" "Almost there," Naruto said as he watched the proceedings. Muramaru inched his foot forward as Ariko forced herself to stay immobile. It took 3 tries, but he finally managed to hook his foot right where he wanted. "Got it," the male clone said. "Just a little more." He pushed his foot forward a tiny bit, forcing Ariko's side pocket open millimeter by millimeter. "So?" Ariko asked hopefully. Muramaru let his foot fall back down. "Nothing. Pocket's empty." "Damn!" Naruto swore. "That's another thing out." "Anything else?" The 3 Narutos had spent the last hour trying to figure out ways of escaping their chains, listing things they could do without hand seals. Unfortunately, they hadn't gotten any results yet. The Academy's escape techniques weren't enough for solid chains like these. Both the leaf floating technique and the chakra shield didn't affect the bandages that were preventing them from using Jutsu, and while they might be able to prime tags without their hands, their captors had not forgotten to remove every weapon they had on themselves. Naruto himself was even unable to use chakra, which was either because of the seals on his stomach or the chains on his limbs. This wouldn't have been such an issue if they'd had some clone backup available. Unfortunately, the 3 Narutos had taken Ebisu's warning seriously, and hadn't used any ninjutsu since entering Fumoto-cho. Not that it would have mattered since, with the low population of the city, the clones would have been evident from the start. "I can't think of much," Ariko replied. "Only thing left that comes to mind is the tree walking technique." "That's the opposite of what we want," Naruto said with a sigh. "We want to make things leave, not make them stick." Muramaru's eyes went wide at those words. "I'm an idiot," he said, causing the others to turn towards him. Clearly focusing, He started channeling chakra to his fingers. What are you trying to do? Iruka asked. Miramara didn't answer, continuing to concentrate. A ripping sound echoed through the room, followed by another, then another. After a minute of such sounds, Miramara spread his fingers wide, then let them flow into a familiar pattern. He then disappeared from his spot, appearing on the other side of the room, naked. Oops, he said as he looked down. I think I left too much behind. He then walked back to the chains to withdraw his shirt and pants. How did you do that? Both Naruto and Iruka asked. You remember Kuritori's lesson on the tree walking technique, right? He answered as he dressed himself. The two others nodded. Remember what happens if you put too much chakra into the technique? It damages the... Naruto said, then realized what the male clone had meant. Right. He looked down and tried channeling chakra once more. Nothing happened. Doesn't work with what I have, he said with a sigh. Not surprising, Miramara said as he made sure everything was properly in place. Beside him, tears were already appearing in Ariko's restraints. We'll help you out as soon as Ariko's free. The boy then went to help his female compatriot escape. It didn't take long before she was free, even managing to use Kawarimi while leaving only the chains behind. She then quickly went to the corner where Chibo was staying, and stripped him of his bindings. That done, she put a hand on his chest and slowly smiled. He's fine, she revealed, placing the rabbit on her head. Both Naruto and Miramara released a sigh of relief at those words. That was one less thing to worry about. How about my chains? The blonde asked. The paper seals weren't an issue, but removing those didn't allow Naruto to escape as the other two had. The two clones tried everything from replacement techniques to wind chakra, but in the end, they were forced to melt the chains and manacles down with Akaraka Jigoki. Doing so unfortunately took time as they had to be careful, which meant it was another hour before the seals had melted enough for Naruto to escape. Now what, boss? Miramara asked. Normally, he wouldn't be calling Naruto that, but this was nothing close to a normal situation, and the three of them were alone here. We're getting out of this cell and finding Sensei. Any issue with that? He asked. The two clones shook their heads. It's quite possible he's already been captured, Iruka added. Naruto nodded. Since Konoha Genin teams were always attached to a more experienced ninja, common sense would be to go after the Jonin first. Anyway, I'm filling this place with clones. If Sensei is inside, we'll find him. If not, I'm pretty sure we'll draw enough attention that he'll come around soon enough. You know that's gonna draw the attention of every enemy in this place, right? Miramara asked. Fine by me, the blonde genin answered with a bloodthirsty grin. I'm not gonna hold back, not now. With what's happening in the village and Sensei missing, there's definitely some backsides in need of kicking. You two with me? Always, Iruka said, while Miramara nodded. One cross seal later, a dozen more Naruto appeared in the room. Seconds later, a stream of fire melted the lock that was holding them prisoner, and all of them rushed out. Let's go, people! Naruto yelled, and was answered by battle cries from the rest of his team. You really should take care of yourself better, you know, Shukun said as he finished with another medical scanning technique. Your liver's resistance to toxins is downright pathetic for a career shinobi. Ebisu resisted the urge to yell once more. Not only was he tied to a table, stripped near naked, and analyzed like a piece of meat, but his tormentor had the gall to complain about just about everything regarding his body. Yes, he knew he wasn't the example of physical perfection that his teammate Guy was, but having it pointed out to his face in clinical terms was pouring salt on the wounds. Still, with the gag in place, there wasn't much he could do anyway. The special Jonin heard the door open, and then the clack of wood on tile. He recognized the sound. That was the innkeeper's leg, for certain. Ebisu realized that they'd been in the enemy's lair from the start, and hadn't noticed. He mentally swore at himself. He should have been more careful. Master, the genin have escaped, the innkeeper said as he advanced. The door was forced, and the alarms rang. Really? Shukun replied. He looked at the side, where Ebisu could see a clock from the corner of his eyes. They should still be unconscious, and for at least 5 more hours. You did restrain the lot of them like I told you? Yes, he said, then recited his orders. Both pairs of chakra seals on the blonde boy. 8 chakra siphons on his stomach along with 4 coil blockers, placed as you directed. The other 2 were tied like every other ninja we've captured. One of them must have some special bloodline technique, or something, the scientist replied. He'd only done a cursory scan of their chakra and nothing else. He should have done deeper tests. No matter. Release all the experiments. That should take care of them. Which suit do you want? I'll take the last Earth one. It's the best you've gotten me since my first. Ebisu could hear the raw satisfaction there was in those words. He didn't know what they meant by suits, but he wasn't looking to find out. Let me just stop things here and I'll transfer you. The scientist then turned to Ebisu. I'm sorry, but duty calls. Don't worry, I'll be back later for more tests. We'll have some good times together, you and I. MMPH. Ebisu tried yelling as the man's chakra-enhanced palm reached for his face, but once more the gag stopped him. He wanted nothing to do with the man's tests, and questioned the sanity of anyone who thought otherwise. Then fingers touched his brow, and he knew no more. The place was a complete labyrinth. Running down long corridors with barely enough light, the three Narutos felt it was a little like being inside the Iruka tunnels. Those tunnels, however, didn't have side rooms every few dozens meters. Up until now, the group had found only cells, with nothing worse inside than a dead rat. Still, they checked everything. It wouldn't do to miss Ebisu's cell simply because they'd skipped one or two. Incoming! One of the clones scouting ahead of the pack said before diving to the side. Still, that didn't help as a claw swipe burst him as the enemy passed by. It wasn't anything the Naruto clones had seen before. It had a wolf's head on a gorilla's body, with a crocodile's tails and way too many arms. 6 of them to be exact, with 3 different pairs. All the pieces were attached together by bizarre black thread, crudely stitched in a way that shouldn't work, but still did. The clones in front didn't wait, charging 3 at the time. 2 died before doing anything, but the last managed to electrocute the beast before disappearing. It fell down in a heap, dead on the spot. Well, Miramara said as Naruto generated another dozen Kage Bunshin. That wasn't so tough. Not 4 seconds after those words, another patchwork chimera rushed down the corridor. This one got no farther than the previous one, taking 3 clones with it. Another 2 creatures ran forward screaming before it even hit the floor. Defensive formation! Naruto yelled, creating more copies. He then stepped back as Bunshin formed protective lines in front of the Genin team. Against them, wave after wave of unnatural beasts pushed forward, biting and clawing everything in their way. The situation quickly became a stalemate. On one side, the monstrous beasts seemed endless and ever different, while on the other Naruto used the side rooms to summon more clones, bolstering the lines. The fact that the corridor was barely 2 meters wide meant that the numbers that could effectively fight were limited, and the lack of ranged weapons, or time to prepare more powerful techniques, made it so the clones were the ones doing all the fighting. Simple punches and kicks weren't enough, and they hadn't been able to retrieve their weapons as of yet. This bloody, close fighting went on for more than 5 minutes before one of the clones found a better way. Instead of directly taking the charge of some bizarre bear/bull/tiger mix, he dodged to the side, climbing up the wall to stay outside the creature's reach. He then jumped on its back and shocked the creature before being dispelled by the lightning technique. Follow that example, Naruto yelled. Luckily for the group, the first who did so was a clone trying to rush over the enemy lines. As soon as he was above the combat, he took an arrow to the knee and turned to smoke. What? Iruka cried out. None of that, Shinobi-san, an unknown voice echoed over the beastly howls. It came from somewhere between 2 of the lights, making the source invisible in the dark. I'm sorry to say, but the curfew is in effect. You should all return to your rooms to sleep some more. Who are you? Naruto yelled back. What, you don't recognize me? The voice answered, a hint of a smirk clearly audible. You kids, you make an old man sad. Old man? Muramaru replied, perplexed. And that's the third, the voice answered. Muramaru, was it? How do you know? The male clone yelled back. You'd be surprised at what an innkeeper hears, kid, the voice said. Well, good night all. At that, something shattered right over the heads of the genin. All 3 jumped to the side, expecting an explosive, but nothing like that came. You missed, Naruto retorted victoriously. Oh, did I? Naruto's elation was short-lived, as Muramaru and Iruka fell right beside him. His knees failing, he forced himself to cross his arms, channeling all that he could into what might be his last technique. Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. He yelled, only for the floor to welcome him back into darkness. Naruto was unfortunately more of a doer than a thinker. That was why, when faced with a dangerous situation, he tended to act instead of doing the smart thing, like informing the rest of the network of the latest happenings. As it often did, this meant that all the clones had only been updated once the first Bunshin fell in battle, not the way one preferred learning about a situation. Of course, orders had been dispatched quickly. Konoha, who had the most experience leading troops during such a situation, had quickly given orders. The clones closest to Fumoto-cho, who were part of the merchant network, had been ordered to send support as fast as possible. They were, however, hours away at quickest speed, and that was if they didn't miss the paths that the team had taken. Other clones were dispatched. Tsuya informed the Hokage of what was happening as soon as she was free, and he ordered the network to find Jiraiya as soon as possible, and to order him straight to Fumoto-cho. He seemed to have an idea about who was the cause of this, and wanted the Toad Sage on the scene pronto. The clones, however, were one step ahead. Sara was a former guard of the merchant network, and she'd been one of those dispatched to find the Sannin from the very moment they'd first been informed about Naruto's situation. There were 24 like her, all over the village, trying to find the older shinobi. Unsurprisingly, most were concentrated on the red light district, which was where Jiraiya could usually be found. Sara had another target in mind. Last time she was out of the tunnels for ramen, she'd heard rumors of perverts spying on women relaxing in the hot springs. She hadn't given the matter much thought, but now that she was looking, she wouldn't be surprised to find that Jiraiya was the source of those rumors. And, as the man himself had said, a rumor always had bits of truth at its source. It wasn't like a single clone outside the brothels would make much difference anyway. Doing quick replacements, she efficiently canvassed the many hot springs close to the wall. Nothing, nope, nothing, a singular cat, nothing. What was that? Perched on the side of the wall, there was someone there. Sara couldn't tell who it was, as the man, she supposed, had some form of camouflage coat hanging over his shoulders. She wouldn't have noticed him if not for the slight movement of a pen of some sort drawing her attention. One last switch brought her right beside the man. From this close, Jiraiya's white hair was evident, and he had a lecherous smile going from ear to ear. He was also mumbling something, but it was too low to be heard, a fact she was glad for. "Sensei, the Hokage is calling for you," she said clearly when it was evident he hadn't registered her presence. "Hiruzen knows I'm busy right now," their mentor in Spycraft replied, not taking his eyes from the hole he was looking through. His fingers wrote out 3 more lines, and Sara could swear he was about to start drooling. "Naruto's in danger," she continued. Jiraiya went instantly from his crouch to looking at her in the eyes as if he'd teleported. Gone was the perverse grin, and the man's glare was all business. "Clone?" Sara nodded. "Situation?" Jiraiya didn't blink, staring her down intently. "Naruto was taken down and captured in Fumoto-cho, the location of his C-ranked mission," she explained. "He managed to free himself, but he's currently fighting some sort of bizarre patchwork beasts along with at least a poison specialist. It's in some form of underground base, probably close to the village." The Toad Sannin scowled. "Orochimaru." The next second, he clapped his hand on the ground, and the largest toad Sara had ever seen appeared before him. He wasted no time jumping on the amphibian's back. Fumoto-cho, on the double. The toad's leap was prodigious, taking Jiraiya right to the wall, with a second carrying him out of sight. Sara didn't know what to do for a second. She'd completed her mission, but things didn't feel right. An idea quickly came to mind, and she didn't waste a second before implementing it. A pair of kawarimi took her beyond the wall, and 5 more allowed her to catch up to their teacher. "You coming with me?" Jiraiya said, not moving from his position on his summons. "How else are you going to get updates?" Sara replied, sticking herself to the amphibian's back. It wasn't something she'd practiced, so it would be good training at least. "Real-time situation updates, right?" Jiraiya said with a grin. "I could live with that." "You have a name?" Saru, the clone, replied as she sent an update to the network. "Ha!" The man laughed. "That brings back memories." "Well, Saru, hang on tight. We've got at least an hour's road to Fumoto-cho, and Gamasoka here's a fast but bumpy ride." The wave of newly spawned clones, which was the largest to date, saw the 3 genin go down as they appeared. As such, they reacted instantly. "Fan out," the clone who'd appeared closest to Naruto said. "Those in the back, I need drainers and spheres. Front, we need to push forward and make some space." They couldn't play for time anymore. "Whoa!" the clones yelled in unison, charging forward. Arrow after arrow pelted those who had appeared on the walls and ceiling, but the number of Bunshin thinned slowly. Those arrows that didn't break were gathered, if only to have extra weapons to use. "What are you?" the voice demanded, an undercurrent of fear now clear in his tone. "Your end," the leader replied with a scowl. Another clone had a flash of inspiration. With some judicious use of Akaraka Jigoki, he'd weakened the hinges on one of the doors enough that a couple of clones could rip it out. It was then given to a pair of Bunshin on the ceiling, who accepted the impromptu shield gladly. Using said protection, the duo charged forward at speed, the few clones still above dropping to thin the beastly herd. Behind them, a horde followed, regardless of cover. Arrows still thinned their ranks, but they were now advancing fast toward their foe. That can't be," the man cried as he fired while stepping back. No genin can do something like that. Watch us, the pair of shielding clones replied, echoed by a number of those following. There was a last shot from the archer, then the man was heard running away at full speed, leaving the clones with only the beasts. With him gone, the chimeras were quickly eliminated, as the few who could reach the ceiling weren't enough to counter the few hundred Bunshin left. The Naruto clone who'd taken command looked around as the last few humanoid beasts breathed their last. Everyone, teams of 6. Go on and scout. I want Ebisu and that archer found. Rip the doors out and use them as shields. No reason to get sniped. Hi, the many clones replied, acting as ordered. The group that already had a door ran forward, accompanied by 4 more Bunshin, while the rest started gathering more shields. The leading clone moved to the group that had taken up the original trio's protection. That was the largest group at 10. 4 had hands on Naruto's back, replenishing their reserves in case of combat. While they could drain chakra from the air or the walls, it wasn't as fast or effective as draining people, Naruto especially. In a case like this, the extra time wasn't worth it. You 10 are staying with me and the team. We're getting out as soon as an exit is found, the leader said. We already have troops on the way, and it's better if we can point them directly to the base. Not to mention I want everyone who fell unconscious as far from here as we can get them. He didn't know why the poison hadn't worked on the new clones while taking down the originals, but now wasn't the time to think of such things. There would be plenty of time in the future to do so. He then sat down in the cell the group had chosen and waited behind an impromptu barricade. An exit would be found, they just had to wait until then. Shukun knew he should have gone back to the Konoha ninja in his lab, but he couldn't help but make sure his masterpiece was still in perfect condition. It was the crowning achievement of his scientific career. The body was solid enough to maintain the grudge near indefinitely, and it was built of the greatest parts he'd harvested over the years. The control system was more complex than any other suit he had in this place, but it was worth it for the results it gave. But, as usual, his time admiring his greatest work was once again cut short. Jero ran in like the Shinigami's hounds were after his soul, and went straight for him. Master, he cried out, clearly winded. Surprising, given the body he was in. We have to escape. Escape? Shukun repeated, confused. Why would we escape? The swarm, he continued. The swarm is coming, and it won't stop. The swarm? The scientist asked, not making sense of what was said. I send you against a trio of genin, the lowest actual ninja, and you come back yelling about a swarm? The blonde-haired man suddenly noticed a detail. Did you run out of arrows? That was surprising. Jero was a crack shot with a bow at any distance, and the suit he wore only made him deadlier. Yes, Jero finally answered, looking down. I shot and shot and shot, but there were always more targets to remove. Every single one another of those orange boys, and they took down the beast too at the time. Shadow clones, Shukun replied. That wasn't so dangerous. If Jero was right, with those numbers they'd fall out of chakra exhaustion soon enough. Even with whatever was sealed on that boy. Go back, the scientist said, handing the hunter a pair of quivers. The clones are just a ploy. They'll disappear soon enough. Are you crazy? The servant replied. They're infinite, Shukun sighed. There was no such thing as infinite chakra. Everyone who used it knew that very well. But Jero had never been a ninja, and had never had any form of chakra training, so superstitions like that did appear from time. They aren't, I can promise you, the scientist explained. Depending on that boy's reserves, they may even already have disappeared. Kage Bunshin aren't made to be used in great numbers, especially not by genin. Really? Jero asked, unsure. Shukun nodded. Really. The servant turned to the door, only to find the lock and handle reddening quickly. It burst open a second later, and 4 similar faces could be seen on the other side. Found you, they chorused in an eerie echo. The tunnels near the cells had widened into a full complex once the clones had escaped from the part they had been imprisoned in. With all the crisscrossing corridors they found, the teams split up in every direction, trying to find their targets. They still opened every door, not leaving a single room unsearched, and most of the times, they wished they hadn't done so. Judging by the number of rooms, this base had once been the home of a much larger contingent of people than the number they'd already faced. There were numerous labs, each equipped differently, clearly prepared for whatever gruesome experiments they were used in, and oftentimes there were still results of those experiments to be found. There were limbs and claws hanging from hooks here and there as eyeless faces of both humans and animals stood in proud places upon various tables. There were human chests open for all to see, some with organs missing, some not. Everything was abnormally fresh, with no traces of decomposition or the like, something the many Narutos attributed to the seals that could be found everywhere. More than a single clone tried purging their non-existent lunches at the site, and those that did not could only feel an uncommonly strong rage surging from their core. This was even worse than Gato and Wave. This was plainly inhuman. The leader of the fifth group was one of those who raged. Actions like this shouldn't fly, not in any self-respecting world. He and his group went from room to room, checking each face in turn. Ebisu hadn't been found yet, which was both a good thing and a bad one. Bad because he was still missing, and whoever had done this could be doing the same to him any minute. Good because they hadn't found anyone alive yet. If Ebisu had been found, it would have been in any state the clones would care to see their sensei in. The groups were receiving regular updates as the various teams finished their assigned corridors. By the time the fifth group was halfway done with their own path, they finally received one of the updates they were looking for. Sensei found, it said. Along that was the last sight of the sending Bunshin, that of Ebisu stripped to his boxers lying tied up and unconscious on an operating table. The thumbs up of the clone beside him was especially helpful in that regard. Ebisu was barely breathing, and without that part of the vision there might have been doubts. That news brought the morale of the team back up, and they rushed through the next rooms. Since Sensei had been found, there was no need to check every face that stood frozen. If it wasn't an enemy or an exit, there was no reason to dally. 8 rooms later, the clone at point stopped the whole group. "Shush!" he whispered, and everyone stopped. With all the beasts dead and the clones being as widespread as they were, the place should be completely silent. But not here, as voices could be heard coming from farther down the corridor. The sounds were much too low for words to be made out, but it was still the first indication of their foes since that archer escaped. The 6 clones didn't hesitate, skipping forward as silently as possible. The room the voices came from was quickly found, and it was a big one, judging by the closest doors on the same side. With only hand signs, the leader quickly ordered everyone around. A single black sphere was brought up to melt the lock open, while a clone at the back updated everyone. The 2 shieldbearers stood doors at the ready, prepared for any incoming attack. This door was no more resistant than any before, and the metal melted in second. A good kick later, and they were in. "Found you," all 4 clones at the door said in chorus as only Bunshin could. The archer reacted instantly, loosing a single shot directly at the clones. It hit only metal, as the blockers had been ready for such a thing. Now that they were in an area with more light, the archer could clearly be seen. He was a tall man with the usual scars ninjas acquired during their lives, with short cropped hair and a solid build. Like all the beasts, though, he had changes all over. His eyes were more animal-like than human, and there was an extra pair of feline ears laying atop his head in addition to his human ones. But most evident was the extra arm at his back. The man was clearly practiced with it, as he used it to reload his bow at a rate that was phenomenal. Behind him was a blond man in a lab coat, who the clones supposed was his boss. The rage rose again at the sight. This was the horrible person who'd done such things. Behind him were more examples of his inhumanity. Even though the bodies there were clearly in a better state, the stitches could easily be seen from their position. The light and the size of the room had another advantage, which the clones used quickly. After quick kawarimi, they were spread all over the room, no longer at the mercy of the archer. 2 of the Bunshin attacked him, while the 4 other went directly to the person they saw as the mastermind. The archer managed a last kill before being taken down with a Saishu Hoden, while the scientist released a short-range wave of lightning that only a single clone dodged. "Irritating," the man said, only for another clone team to enter the room. Behind them, more could be heard, all rushing toward combat. This didn't have the expected reaction from the man, who smiled. "Well," he said, "it seems it's time for some actual battle testing then." He did 4 hand seals, and slammed the palm of his hand to his forehead. "Ainshinten Bunshin no Jutsu," he yelled as he did so, his body falling to the ground. And deeper in the room, everything rumbled as a giant rose from his resting place, a bizarre echoing laughter ringing all over the place. Chapter 27, Aftermath. Prank Day 176. The last remaining member of the 5th clone group didn't know what to do. He could hear chains clanking to the ground and could see the distant form of something rising under a tarp at the far end of the room, but didn't know how to react. He had no clue what jutsu the man had just performed. Should he go and secure the man's body? Was it a decoy? Beside him, the newly arrived group of Kage Bunshin took position, a pair even readying black spheres. "Sorry to keep you waiting." Shukuin's voice rang out, the laughter somehow continuing in tandem with his words. The giant form took a step forward, causing the cloth covering to fall to the ground behind it. He could tell with a glance that this monster, not the patchwork beast from before, was the goal of whatever horrible research was going on here. It stood just inches shorter than the ceiling, was thicker than the oldest trees, and was crisscrossed with the black sticks the clones had come to associate with the chimeras in this place. Like the chimeras, he had more limbs than was natural. 2 extra pair of mismatched arms jutted from the sides of the thing's chest, while a heavy tail like that of a lizard trailed behind him. There were eyes everywhere, from its stomach to its elbows, and its feet ended in things more akin to talons than to regular toes. Worse, however, was its head. It was like someone had tried smashing 5 different faces together, then had said close enough before giving up. It had more noses than mouths, and it had several of those, and he suspected the scattering of mismatched eyes stretched all the way around to the back of his head. Its cranium was abnormally large, as if it had more than one brain, and various animal ears twitched in every direction from the top of its scalp. The laughter stopped. So, like what you see? The many mouths exclaimed in a bizarre echo. The clones were too shocked to answer. This was the biggest thing they'd ever fought, save the giant serpents during the invasion, and those had required special measures that weren't currently available. With the armor-like plates that were clearly visible and the chains swinging from the biggest arms, it was a clear contender for the title of physically strongest foe that the many Narutos had ever faced. Most skilled wasn't a question, Orochimaru. Well? The monster asked. We've waited long enough. At those words, it barged toward them with ground-eating strides. Everyone reacted instantly. Those with spheres threw them forward while the rest responded with the first jutsu that came to mind. The beast ignored the blinding flashes, and a wave of its chains took out the few clones who'd countercharged, intent on electrocuting the thing. The member of the 5th group, however, did a quick kawarimi backwards out of the room. It wasn't that he was retreating, no. It was just that the creature's bulk was larger than the door, which meant his new position would give him the advantage. His thoughts were interrupted by the sounds of hands clapping together. That was when the entire room's floor turned into jetting spikes, instantly dispelling all the other clones. Oh, it could use jutsu too. Thinking quickly, the last Bunshin arrived at a decision. Hey, you muscle-bound brute, it yelled, grabbing the thing's attention. You can't catch me. It screamed, adding an obscene gesture to the mix. He then ran off in the opposite direction from which he'd originally come. He hadn't made much distance before the beast burst through the too small door as if it weren't there. Luckily, the corridors were smaller than the room had been, which should slow him down some. Doton, Dumantapa! It yelled, slamming its hands on the walls. Or not, the Bunshin thought as the corridor doubled in size. He didn't stop, yelling insults and the like as he continued running. He gained some more breathing room as the thing turned to send a bolt of lighting to intercept clones coming from the other way, but lost more as the creature quickly caught up. With his stride, he covered ground nearly twice as fast, and quick replacements weren't useful in the dark and twisting corridors. His play for time was rewarded a few minutes later when a quick memory message arrived. An exit had been found. Better yet, it was on the opposite side of the complex. A confirmation came the next second from the team defending the real Naruto, along with new orders for the clone groups, orders that he very much agreed with. Trusting the others to do their jobs, he turned left at the next junction, preparing a quick sphere. The Bunshin fired it as soon as the monster came into sight, then resumed running without looking at the results. Behind him, the sound of the beast's chakra force chains intercepting the incoming projectile was followed by the sphere's premature detonation. A quick jutsu widened the corridor, and the chase was back on. That was how things went for the next few minutes. The clone kept the thing's attention with insults and quick techniques, all the while ignoring the man's words. He made sure not to provide too obvious of a target after a lightning bolt nearly took off his head, but outside of that he kept to his role, which meant that, once he got the message he'd been waiting for, he circled back to a very specific location. He ignored the man's taunts as he did so. He knew that he was running out of chakra, but he had more than enough to last until his role was done. He ran straight through the next junction, looking back only at the last instant, which meant he didn't miss the look on the face of his foe as dozens of clones fired streams of flame at him from every direction. He didn't get the look he'd expected. No eyes widening in surprise, no scowls, no fervent denials. Just him coming to a stop in an instant, while a pair of hands, the middle ones this time, he noticed, quickly formed seals. Doton, Hirado, he announced simply. The clone then knew no more. The Kage Bunshin leading the group defending the real Naruto, along with the other 2 genin, winced as the memories of multiple dying clones hit him. Their last moments weren't very revealing, only informing the Bunshin that it was a Doton technique that had ended them. Turning around, once he opened his eyes, was much more informative. On the east side of the village, there was a crater-like depression, easily 25 meters wide. The main part of it was in the street, but a good chunk of a nearby field had also been destroyed, and there was now a building which was missing a wall and, as such, was in danger of crumbling. The hope that their foe had died in the ambush regardless of its last move were dashed when the beast burst from the center of the crater. It wasn't unharmed, having some burns here and there, but it was still clearly mobile and able to fight. He didn't wait a moment before sending out new orders, as everyone still alive below was needed up here, pronto. The numbers of Bunshin that responded as the monstrous creature climbed out of the crater it was in didn't reassure the leading clone one bit. They were left with fewer than 100 clones. While the ones defending Naruto had charged up as much as they could while waiting for an exit, that still didn't leave them with much to work with. Now what? One of the clones who just arrived asked. The leader didn't have a ready answer. Crawling out of the broken remains of the corridor he'd been in, Shukuen shook his head and got his bearings. He'd been having so much fun testing the limits of his creation that he'd lost track of time. The ambush had been an unpleasant wake-up call. He'd been injured somewhat before taking the clones down, but nothing serious. Eyes and skin were easily replaced, and the grudge compensated for the rest. He had to admit, this was the longest he'd worked this body, and it responded as well as he'd expected, if not better. He was glad to see his masterpiece deserve the name. Anyway, he'd played long enough. Time to take down whatever foes were left. Taking a deep breath with his 2 pairs of lungs, Shukuen focused on sensing his adversaries. The difference between his original body and this one made the exercise somewhat difficult, but after a few moments he had a fair enough feel for the surrounding chakra, and better yet, he could still detect his tracking seals. While he'd not taken the time to install said seals on the prisoners, those made it easy to ignore the various tag villagers to focus on the real targets. He wasn't surprised to find a number of them crowded together inside the inn, one of the most available exits let into its basement. A quick shunshin brought him right to the door, where he spat out a bolt of lighting at the biggest grouping of chakra signatures. He took down at least 3, while the rest spread out in a burst of chakra he associated with the replacement technique. He followed that with another flat earth jutsu, leveling the building and bursting the numerous clones still in the corridors below. There hadn't been anything other than storage rooms close to this exit, so nothing of importance was lost. Jumping clear of the falling building, Shukuen tracked his remaining targets. 17 left, he noted, no 18, he then amended as another clone popped into existence. The scientist didn't hesitate, charging the summoner. Whoever this ninja was, his reserves had to be giving out. They were running out of clones. The clone who'd taken charge of things had been lucky enough to evade the first bolt of lightning, and he'd taken position on top of the mayor's house, after a pair of quick kawarini, to keep himself aware of the flow of battle. They were losing. Worse was how clear it was. By now, the clones fought in 1s and 2s, trying to buy time. Below, a pair of clones had the beast in a pincer, looking for an opening where they could use their spheres to full effect. So far, said opening wasn't forthcoming. They'd tried just about everything. Their blinding technique wasn't affecting it, and the creature wasn't leaving them time to set up a tornado. Getting close enough to shock it was basically impossible, as it didn't have any blind spot they could take advantage of, and the thing had the blatant Hellfire's measure, dodging it without fail. Their last main technique, their water jutsu, was just an invitation for a lightning bolt, as they'd found out the hard way. It even had some form of close-ranged electric surge, which meant that grabbing on and draining it wasn't an option. Disarming it of those chains had first seemed a possibility, but they'd learned that the things were more solid than expected. They resisted high heat and didn't channel lightning, which meant another avenue of attack was cut off. Frankly, the best they could do was buy time. That, and flee, but Ebisu was still trapped below, along with a few clones, and they weren't going to abandon their teacher to his fate. He knew they had reinforcements incoming, if not what they were, but he was afraid they wouldn't make much of a difference. He made a sudden realization as 2 clones below fell to the creature's Earth Spikes jutsu. The Naruto clones only had 2 ways of taking down enemies. One was quick takedowns with forbidden techniques, which had been the staple of individual ninja during the invasion, and the second was outlasting whoever they were battling, like they did against Gaara. Unfortunately, this beast seemed like it would be the one outlasting them, this time. A quick replacement saved him from a bolt of lightning, depositing him on the other side of the road, while another clone tried to use the opening to slam a flaming sphere right in the creature's leg. He wasn't fast enough though, as the opponent managed a quick shunshin to emerge unscathed. That's all you can do? The same techniques over and over? the thing yelled in his bizarre echoing voice. Pathetic. Also insulting was the fact that the thing had started on a critique of their combat style, analyzing each and every technique that came its way and pointing out their flaws. Most of them were already well known by the clones, which only made it more grating. 7 left, it pointed out. With 3 of those unconscious, which probably means that they are the real ones. Shit! Time to end this. He then started chaining lightning bolts one after the other, targeting them with unerring precision. His 3 pairs of arms somehow allowed him to use 3 copies of the same technique at once. All the clones started replacing themselves repeatedly, hoping to delay the inevitable. One lasted 2 jumps before getting hit, while another vanished out of chakra depletion after the 5th. The 2 left looked at each other from opposite sides of the street, sharing a meaningful glance, then shifted to the road proper. If they were going to be falling, better to go out fighting. A ninja to the last, it said, and Naruto could find a note of contempt in its voice. How unsurprising. The one formerly leading prepared for a charge, hoping to land at least a final attack, when a message arrived. Incoming. He nearly mistimed his jump and fell prey to the field of spikes because of that. His compatriot wasn't as lucky, being burst on the spot, which was when a giant toad fell straight on the thing. It was at least 4 times as big as the beast, and squashed it to the ground instantly. It didn't manage to kill it though. No! It yelled. I won't be defeated so easily. Glowing from visibly chakra-reinforced strength, he started pushing himself to freedom. Rasengan. The toad sage disappeared from the summon's back, only to reappear right above the man. In his hand was a glowing sphere of chakra, making a whirring noise like dozens of buzzsaws acting in unison. Before the beast could do anything, Jiraiya smashed the ball straight into his chin, pushing through without any resistance. The monster's head was blown to pieces instantly, and it fell back under the giant toad's mass. The last Kage Bunshin fell to the ground in a heap. After the long battle they'd gone through, such an end felt pretty anticlimactic, but he was glad for Jiraiya's presence. This was the closest the clones had been to actually dying off, and that would have been the best scenario. With what they'd found, the man might have kept the real Naruto alive for his experiments, but he was sure he wouldn't have made the same mistake twice. You okay? Jiraiya asked as he stepped forward. What was clearly a female Naruto clone was right behind him, appearing with a kawarimi. Give me enough time to drain some chakra, and I'll be fine, the Bunshin replied, rising. Clone then, the Sannin noted. The original? Give me a second and I'll lead you to him, he said, flashing his hands into seals necessary for chakra drain. He maybe had one replacement left in him before he burst, and this wasn't the time to take risks. Naruto came back to consciousness for the second time that day, and was happy to see that he wasn't chained up or imprisoned this time. Inside his head, however, he had images fighting each other for supremacy, and he wasn't able to make heads or tails of whatever had gone on. As such, he shook his head and rose. Being that he didn't seem to be captive, he'd be able to get answers quickly enough. His rising quickly drew attention, and he found himself with the rest of his team save Ebisu. 2 clones were also present, along with, for some reason, his spying teacher Jiraiya. He focused on the last. I'm surprised to see you here. You think I'd let one of my students fall against some Orochimaru wannabe? He replied with a smile. I was on my way as soon as I heard, he then continued in a more serious vein, and thank God for him. The only Naruto clone dressed in his normal orange jumpsuit added. Without him, we'd probably have been done for. Naruto scowled. How bad? He quickly looked to the side at his other clones. They seemed perfectly fine, but they might have slept through the battle like he had. There was however one conspicuous absence that gave Naruto shivers. Did something happen to Ebisu? The Naruto clone shook his head. He's fine. His pride will probably be the worst hit. Where is he then? He's still out, Jiraiya replied. And he should be back up in a few hours. I could probably wake him up, but I'm not a medic nin. Better he regain consciousness normally than what I do. Good, Naruto replied with a smile. I suppose you're like us and want an update, correct? Ariko asked, caressing the still sleeping Ichibo. I'm not the only one with scrambled memories, I suppose, Naruto said. Both Muramaru and Ariko nodded enthusiastically at that. The group sat down as Naruto's Kage Bunshin went through his tale. Judging by Jiraiya's reactions, he had already gone through this once. He nodded in all the right places and asked for further clarifications on various points. As the story advanced, Naruto scowled more and more. It was clear that, without Jiraiya's timely arrival, they would have been done for. You were lucky. From what I can tell, the man wasn't really a ninja, Jiraiya said as the tale was in its last parts. If he'd had the relevant experience along with that powerful body and his elemental ninjutsu, he'd have been an S-ranked fighter quite probably. Yeah, Naruto replied a few moments after the clone finished. Still, that doesn't feel like a victory, even if we're the last ones standing. Everyone nodded at that. There'll be battles like that through your entire career, Jiraiya added, nodding wisely. I should know, I went through my share of them. In fact, I owe the title of Sannin to a battle that, even now, years after the fact, still feels like a loss. You mean the one against Hanzo the Salamander? Miramara asked. Yes, the Toad Sage confirmed. Orochimaru, Tsunade and I survived, and that's the best we can say about that fight. The fact that the title we received spread far and wide after the battle only added salt to the wound. He scowled at the reminder. Still, you're all still alive, and your enemies are defeated. Maybe the results aren't what you'd hoped for, but take your victories where you can get them. As long as you live and learn, that's the important part of it. Naruto nodded, as did every clone. They all had things that needed improvement fast, and various ideas on how to do so. How about? Naruto started. Jiraiya stopped him with a raised hand. There'll be more than enough time to discuss this later, and that's the kind of job that's tailor-made for that council of yours. Think about it, and we'll discuss it back home. There are more important things right now. Like what? Naruto asked. You're up for making shadow clones? The Sannin countered, rising. How many do you need? Naruto replied as he followed suit. As many as you can give me, the man said, pointing toward the village. I'll use Earth Jutsu to open up the sealed entrances, but I'll need hands to empty the place. That stuff needs to move pronto, especially if Orochimaru has anything interesting here, and somehow got a warning. Even the... Naruto gulped as an image flashed in his mind. The bodies? I might take a few of the more complete ones back to Konoha for studying by specialists, but outside of that, no, the Toad Sannin replied. I'll build a pyre some distance from the village, and we'll burn whatever's left. I don't want anything that could be found by any sort of scavengers. Right. Naruto nodded, followed by his clones. A moment later, the clearing they were in was filled with copies of the orange-wearing blonde. So, where do we start? He asked. This time, Ebisu was happy to note, there was no scratching of quills or scathing comments as he came to. He was also untied, still clad only in his boxers, and in what seemed like a bed. He might have thought the previous time a dream if not for the few incisions this Shukuin had done that were still hurting him. Still, there was no reason to play possum. The first thing he noted was that this wasn't his own room. The second was the slowing descending sun he could see outside the window. The third was the fact that Jiraiya of the Sannin was standing at his bedside while writing something down in a book. Jiraiya-sama! He exclaimed, shooting upwards. He then realized that bowing from a lying position was basically impossible, and couldn't figure out what to do. At ease, at ease. The Sannin replied, closing his book. How are you feeling? Ebisu twisted around some as a test, and found nothing wrong outside the few cuts. Nothing that would prevent me from doing my duty. Good, the sage said, turning his chair toward the bed. I'd like your report on what happened in the village. The special Jonin shrank a little. Could I be informed of the status of my students? He asked. Jiraiya simply smiled. They're all fine. They actually did very good for their rank, managing to escape the place by themselves. If it hadn't been for the trouble they'd stirred, I might not have found this place at all. That was the story the group had agreed would be the public version of what had happened. Those in the know would get the full report, but Naruto hadn't seen any reason to reveal everything to his sensei. He didn't doubt the man would treat him properly anymore, but he liked the different ways Ebisu interacted with every one of his clones. Thank the kami, Ebisu said, lowering his head. After a moment of silence, he looked straight at the Sannin and nodded. Where should I start? When you arrived in Fumoto-cho would be the best. Ebisu then went over everything. It was a little shameful to admit how easily he'd been taken down to anyone, but Jiraiya was a superior, and he would have to go through this anyway with the Hokage later. Jiraiya was silent as the special Jonin went over every word the man who'd captured him had said, and kept some minutes after the discussion had ended, clearly deep in thought. Could I ask something, Jiraiya-sama? Ebisu finally said, breaking the silence. That broke the Sannin out of his thoughts. Go ahead. Am I unworthy as a teacher? The Toad Sage's eyes widened in surprise. What brought that on? I'm only a special Jonin, and I've never even been invited to the Jonin trials, Ebisu replied. I'm still behind the rest of my teammates in basically every domain, while they're higher ranked than me. His face fell deeper. The day I met Naruto, he beat my shadow clone easily, and I'm pretty sure he was holding back. And now, Someone who isn't even a ninja got the best of me. He took a deep breath, choking back a sob. Should I just give up and give my team to someone else? Jiraiya smirked sadly. I know that feeling so well, you haven't a clue. What? Ebisu replied, shocked. How do you think it was, being in a team with Tsunade and Orochimaru? The Sennin replied. The last Senju, and a born genius? But you're Jiraiya of the Sennin. I wasn't always that, he pointed out. And even then, I still failed. Tell me, who were my students? The Yondaime, of course, the special Jonin replied. And who are the two other members of that Genin team? Ebisu started, opened his mouth, then closed it without saying a word. Thought as much. Jiraiya nodded sadly. They never amounted to much. One died during his second Chunin exam, while the other was a Genin all his life until the Kyuubi claimed him. And Minato was a genius like I've never seen. Even to this day I wonder if he didn't end up so skilled in spite of me. He raised his eyes, looking toward the ceiling. I said the same to my own teacher Hiruzen, and he told what I'll now tell you. Jiraiya went silent for a moment for emphasis. Ask your students, but they... Ebisu started, only to be interrupted. They know better than you think, the Sannin said. Sometimes there are things that can only be seen from the outside. And they may be young, but they notice more than you realize. He rose. I'll leave you to your thoughts. Anyway, I have more than enough paperwork to go through. He then walked out. Ebisu stood there in his bed for a few minutes, before rising himself. It couldn't hurt to hear his team's opinion, and it was their team as well as his. They should be allowed their say at the very least. It didn't take much time for Ebisu to find his way down in the tunnels under the city, and the many Narutos there going back and forth were always happy to give him directions. He found his 3 genin in the largest room he'd seen, huddled around a blond man on the ground. Said man was still breathing, but seemed unconscious somehow. They also hadn't noticed his arrival. Good evening, students. Sensei! The 3 exclaimed as they turned. Glad to see you're all right, Muramura added, to which everyone else, including the rabbit on Ariko's head, nodded. I feel the same way, the man replied, then took a deep breath. No reason to wait. He then bowed. You 3 have my most sincere excuses for the deplorable consequences of my weakness, he said clearly, not looking up. I feel that I failed all of you today, and allowed you to be captured due to my own negligence. Wait, sensei, Naruto replied, raising both hands up. We didn't do any better. Ichigo here probably has a better nose than the 4 of us combined, and even he detected the poison too late. Ebisu shook his head. That may be, but I am still your Jonin sensei. It is on my shoulder that your protection lies, and I've failed in that mission shamefully. He took another breath. Should you request it, I will ensure this team finds a better sensei to fill my post. You 3 have a great future ahead of you, and I would not want to be the one holding you back. He then fell silent, and waited for his judgment. Nope. Naruto was the first to reply. Nope. There's no giving up, not in this team. Yeah, Muramura continued. Why would we want to get rid of you? You could find much better teachers. A taijutsu specialist would be of much more help in developing Muramura's family style, while both kenjutsu and ninjutsu masters would be glad to have you, Naruto, as a student. And I know an Inuzuka Jonin who I'm sure would be interested on how their jutsu could work with Ichigo here. We'd much prefer if you stayed, sensei, Ariko said, and Ichigo nodded at that. And we're more than happy with the things you're teaching us. Like the illusions you started me on. The female clone didn't have them down, yet, but it was only a matter of time. Or the sensing exercises, Muramura added. I already have a ninjutsu teacher, and a kenjutsu teacher, and even a trapping teacher, which I have to thank you for, he said with a nod. I'd prefer a sensei I can trust with what I want to do with my life. Yeah, Muramura added. And anyway, if you think you're not strong enough, just train until you're satisfied with yourself. Naruto exclaimed. What about your own training? The teacher replied. How will I be in charge of it if I'm away practicing? A shadow clone is more than enough for teaching, most of the time, sensei, Naruto pointed out. I wouldn't mind, Ariko added, to which Muramura nodded. Ebisu was silent for a moment. Are you certain of your decision? All the genin nodded. Then the matter is closed, he said with finality. I'll leave you to your work. He glanced back down. Who is that anyway? The one in charge of this place, Naruto replied. He used a bizarre technique to take control of one of the spare bodies laying around. He indicating the surroundings with a wave of his hand, where some of the spare bodies were still present. And fell to the ground like this. We're not sure what to do with him, since he's still alive. I see, the sensei replied. Well, there are mind specialists in Konoha, which may be able to extract some valuable information. Having him transported might very well be worth it. Okay, Naruto replied, going to the walls to find something to bind the captive. Ebisu simply made his way out of the room as he did so. Then he smiled. He'd been afraid for nothing. Walking back toward the exit, he found himself accosted by a trio of clones carrying the most bizarre beast. A second followed a little later, with more still coming. Curious, he went to the source, and found piles of deceased chimeras like those he'd already seen. Now, he wasn't specialized in autopsies, but he knew enough to tell that the many monsters here had been electrocuted to death. All of them, it seemed. That was bizarre since the only lightning user he'd heard about was these beasts' master. Jiraiya wasn't one, and the one member of his team who knew any elemental jutsu was Naruto with his fire technique. In fact, looking around, he could see the results of the boy's technique. The melted hinges were especially illuminating in that regard, especially since the room on the other side was clearly a cell, which meant his team had been right in this place. Something was wrong here. The special Jonin took a deeper look, and quickly found something else. Remains of broken arrows could be found all over, as if someone had been shooting at the people here. Taking that all together meant something even more fishy. His team was hiding something from him. Chapter 28, Homecoming. Prank Day 177. Another batch of scrolls, Erosen and Naruto said, coming out of the former laboratory. Beside him, Muramaru and Ariko unloaded their own burdens, adding to Naruto's pile. I told you not to call me that, the man replied, taking the top document and quickly going over it. One of Jiraiya's shadow clones sitting beside the man did the same with the second scroll. Why can't you call me sensei, like most students do? Well, the name fits, Muramaru pointed out. You can't deny that, Mr. Super Pervert. And we already have a sensei, in case you didn't notice, Ariko continued, indicating Ebisu with a wave of her hand. The special Jonin was in charge of the pyre, and by the scowl on his face, he didn't like the job any more than the many Narutos would have. Jiraiya tossed the rolled-up scroll into one of the piles behind him. Yeah? And how is it going downstairs? We're more than halfway done, Naruto replied. Unless there's another archive down there, we should be finished before the end of the day. That was the reason why they were still in Fumoto-cho. Jiraiya was adamant that the place had to be emptied before they all left, and everyone agreed with him. But Shukun had been a scientist, which meant reams of documents and notes about both the running of this place and the experiments that had been performed therein. Going through that was a long process, especially since Jiraiya, or one of his clones, had to go through every document first. As the highest-ranked Konoha ninja in Fumoto-cho, it was his decision if scrolls had to be sealed from view, so he had to check them all. From there they went into multiple piles, where Naruto clones stacked, ordered and indexed them. They even sometimes copied them, as the Toad Sannin had given them leave to copy whatever jutsu scrolls weren't sealed by his order. The Uruhara library would be growing quite a bit once they were back in Konoha. The three genin were on their way back down when Jiraiya exclaimed. Finally, yes? Ariko asked, turning around. The Sannin held up the scroll in his hands. I was waiting for this one. It has the technical specifications for the combined tracking/control seal that was used on the villagers in this place. Said villagers were still under the seal, hiding from the ninjas. They hadn't said a word yet, and Naruto suspected that was part of their restrictions. It even has instructions on how to perform the counter seal, which'll save me from having to build one. He looked at the three genin. Any of you have experience in seals? Naruto stepped forward after a moment. Tekuno has started me on building explosive and smoke tags, he offered. The other two shook their heads, confident that Jiraiya would understand the meaning. Okay, well, you have to start somewhere. Come here, Naruto, the Sannin said, indicating a spot beside him as he withdrew his sealing equipment. The blonde genin did so. Now. Jiraiya started, taking the tone Naruto associated with the Sannin teaching. Counter seals are seal made to affect other seals. It's one of the most complex branches of Fuinjutsu, as seals often contain elements that would react to tampering. He pointed down at the scroll before him. That one was clearly made for easy removal, which means that it has very little that stops one from taking it off. Now, the main part of a counter seal is this one, which has to target the active part of the Fuinjutsu one is trying to remove. This is the capital part because, Prank Day 179. So, anything urgent to report? The merchant clone in charge, seated at the end of the table, asked. Silence was his answer. Good. Meeting 63 then. First up is the trading network itself. How are things going? We're up by 17 contacts since last meeting, mostly in sand and water countries, a Bunshin on the left replied, his nose in a book. Added to that are a few dozens possible suppliers, especially in fish products. We also have our first contact with the purveyor of Suna steel. Good. No issue there? The clone shook his head in answer, as did his 3 assistants. Perfect then. Point 2. Trade in Konoha. What's happening there? We're losing customers in Konoha, the Leaf Village representative said. Everyone turned toward him in a flash. Come again? Over the last week, 3 different shops cancelled their standing orders with us, and that without any stated reason, Janae explained. I tried going to see the shop owners and question myself, but was given excuses or faced with a closed door. Did it, Iruka? One started. No, Janae answered near instantly. In fact, our orders from Tucci and the other restaurateurs having only gotten larger, as did those from Jiraiya's contacts. It's the latest customers suggested by Tucci that went and cancelled their orders. There was silence for a moment. Did you talk to the man himself? The clone in charge finally asked. Not yet. Janae replied, and an aide beside his shook her head negatively. The one time I went to Ichiraku, the man was absent, and I focused more on the shopkeepers themselves rather than the man who'd suggested them. Do that, the leader said, and nods all around the table echoed his decision. How about outside Konoha? There, trade is slowly picking up, at least in most places, a shadow clone from the other side of the table replied. The merchants in Jincho certainly aren't, but Suna is quickly becoming our biggest secondary market, the man added with a smile. Right next to him, the pair of clones in charge of grass scowled. Naruto clones were competitive, if nothing else. It's at least that, the leader pointed out. Now, last point, and the most important. What's happening with our saboteurs? There were scowls all around. Difficult to say, the clone opposite the leader replied. We lost 3 suppliers since last meeting. One we're pretty sure is enemy action, since the man's fishing boats burned to the ground, but the other 2 were less certain. The first saying it's a bad harvest, which may be due to the wet climate in the last few weeks in that region, and the other may simply be a late shipment. There were nods all around. And our defensive measures? They're slowly advancing, the Bunshin finally replied. Our quick reaction teams are ready, but getting clones close to our various suppliers is a work in progress. Most of those places aren't hiring, and that makes having inconspicuous watchers around 24/7 somewhat difficult. We do have a few places covered, at least, and we'll keep working on it. Do that, the copy in charge confirmed. Any other business that needs to be gone over? Silence answered him again. Meeting adjourned then. Next one is next week at location 17. Let's go, people! Prank day 182. We looted all the documents we could find, along with all the jutsu information there was. They're in the 2nd and 3rd scroll. The Sannin indicated those with his hands. The 4th contains a few examples of Shukun's work, in case Konoha's medics wanted to go over them. The last in the body of Shukun himself. You may want to have Inoichi go over it. There may be more information about Orochimaru's plans and methods in the man's brain. We left the building intact behind, as taking it down would remove the town from the map. Sending a team specialized in fortifications or demolitions in that direction would be a good idea, from my guess. Ebisu did not react outwardly at the incomplete report being given, but he was thinking furiously inside. What was being hidden? Based on his previous findings, he guessed that either his team was hiding part of their skills, or that there was another person involved in his team's escape. He'd thought about it along the way home, and those 2 options were the ones that made the most sense. Especially considering that Naruto was the Kyuubi's prison, and as such could be the target of enemy actions and kidnapping attempts. But which of the 2 was it? Whichever it was, it didn't reflect well on him. If one of his students was a plant, he'd gone on teaching a false genin for weeks without realizing it. While Konoha had some quite decent infiltrators, the idea that he might not have noticed such a thing hurt his pride as a teacher. If that was the truth, then he would never live down the shame. The fact that Naruto would have a guardian angel would hurt his pride less, but would still sting. He knew he wasn't the greatest of shinobi, but the idea that he'd been under watch at all times without a single inkling, that ate him inside a bit. What could he do about it? Good work, the Hokage said as he put down the scroll in his hand. The special jonin pushed back the thoughts he'd been having, and focused on the present. You'll all be credited your C-rank mission, along with an extra A-rank mission for the takedown of one of Orochimaru's bases. Everyone smiled at that. I'm also ordering 2 days off your regular team training for recovery. You've been 2 weeks on mission, you deserve a few days of rest to compensate. Yes. Naruto exclaimed. Beside him, both of his other students smiled. Now dismissed, the Sandaime said with a nod. Jiraiya, stay behind. I have some more questions for you. Ebisu bowed, as did his students, and the four of them made their way out of the tower in silence. The special Jonin then directed them to a cafe close to the tower, and sat them down at a booth. I'll be quick, since I suspect everyone is anxious to get back to their own homes, he said once everyone was seated. Good work, team. The mission might not have gone as expected, but you all reacted professionally to the changes, and came through as needed. While I'll be waiting some time before asking for a second C rank, I have no complaints with your work outside the village, and I know you'll do Konoha proud in your following missions as well. He pushed back the fact that there was a secret between them to the back of his mind. Based on what he'd guessed, they might have been ordered to silence, and pushing for more information might even be treasonous in this case. Make sure to keep in shape, and we'll see each other on Friday. He bowed his head as a salute, and waved. Dismissed. His students made their goodbyes, each going in their own direction. Ebisu himself took the time to drink a good coffee, and pondered what to do. Between his abysmal performance against Shukun, and the fact that there might be a plant on or near his team, it was clear his skills were deficient. He'd not noticed before, because he'd coasted on his talents as a teacher, and while they hadn't atrophied, his skills as a ninja certainly hadn't improved much in the last few years. He'd been content that way once, but no longer. He needed to play catch-up. The worst thing was, he had a good idea how to accomplish such a thing. It would hurt, both physically and mentally, but it was the best way to go at it. The Hokage hadn't prohibited training, only doing so as a team, and soonest started, soonest done. As such, he drained the last of his coffee in a single swig, and stepped outside into the evening air. While it was late for most people's training, he knew from experience where he could find the person he needed at this hour. He went straight for the wall and climbed up, then waited. He didn't have to do so for long. Before the minute was done, a pair of silhouettes appeared in the distance. At the speed they were going, it was but a moment before they passed Ebisu, and he forced himself to follow them. Yash, teammate, Guy said as Ebisu fell into step beside him. Are you here to see the youth of Konoha flourish in the dusk of the day? He asked. The man clearly hadn't changed a bit. Not exactly, the special Jonin replied, forcing himself to maintain the pace. I was hoping to talk to you instead. Guy nodded seriously. Lee, double pace, he yelled, and his student instantly increased his rhythm. Guy instead slowed down, stopping a little later near one of the newly repaired parts of the wall. Now, what can I do for you, Ebisu? Said Ninja took a deep breath to center himself before speaking. I need to get stronger. Guy simply smiled and nodded. Let's get to it then. Okay, that's done, Naruto said as the merchant network representative sat back down. Then, let's get to the meat of this meeting. Gigi, I suppose Jiraiya updated you with the full story? He did. Everyone else not clear on the happenings in Fumoto-cho? He continued. Everyone shook their heads, having been included in the latest mass update. Naruto had informed Iruka straight after leaving the rest of his team, even before said update was done. So, it's clear, it was sheer luck that Jiraiya arrived on time to save our backsides that day. Naruto inclined his head toward the Sannin. Thanks again for that one. My pleasure. One thing that battle made clear is that we have a long way to go if we want to be really effective as a ninja. I've been thinking about it for a good while, and I know I'm not the only one. So ideas, people. Relying on luck isn't something we want to be known for. Nico was the first to raise his hand. We need some form of protocol for a situation like this one. What? That wasn't what Naruto had been expecting. This is the second time we learned about a battle happening from clones dying in combat, the spying advisor continued. While it couldn't be helped during the invasion, a simple message to the rest of us last time would have gained us nearly an hour in response time, which is enormous. The three adult ninja around that table nodded at that. Not only that, Kyuha added as he rose. But we also need a specific code for emergencies like this. The Hokage was in a meeting, and we could have lost time for nothing if we hadn't suspected what he'd answer. A quick way to contact Jiraiya in case of emergencies wouldn't be amiss either. At this, said Sannin lowered his head at the memory. He clearly remembered what he'd been doing when Sara found him. Naruto was silent for a moment, then nodded. Good point. Nico, I'm putting you in charge of this. Meet with the others, and write out a communication protocol for emergencies. Next, Miramaro was the one who rose this time. We need to master more techniques seamlessly. We would have been completely screwed if we'd had our hands paralyzed. Everyone nodded to that. We need better defensive techniques for clones. The chakra shield doesn't cut it. We have to get a way to immobilize opponents, especially fast ones. We need something to take down people who can tank most attacks. Whoa, whoa, whoa! Naruto exclaimed, trying to calm people down. One at a time. Muramaru, since sealless techniques are something you can train on outside this place, I'm putting you in charge of that. You three, he pointed to the trio of clones who'd just spoken out. You're in charge of techniques. I'm expecting at least 6 different ones in total, since we might not manage a few, as we did last time. Everyone who has suggestions, talk to these 3 after the meeting. All the hands went down as the blonde genin finished his proclamation. Any other details? You should practice summoning more. Everyone turned toward Ichibo, who was standing on Ariko's head. We're listening, Naruto replied for the group. From what I heard, one of the main issues at first was the fact that you were stuck underground, and that your earth-moving technique wasn't enough to make an exit. Nods all around. Well, earth specialists are common in the Bunny clan among those that practice ninjutsu. Summoning one of those would have made escaping a lot easier. Naruto couldn't deny that. I have to agree with the rabbit here, Jiraiya added from his seat. If you're gonna be the rabbit sage one day, you need to know the clan you've joined. Who are the rabbits and what are their talents? Who should you call in specific situations? I'll take care of that, Ariko said, raising her hand. I'm the one who spends the most time with Ichibo outside. Might as well make something out of it. Can you bleed? Another clone at the table pointed out. A second later, Ariko's hand went back down as her face lowered. I'll have to take care of that one myself. Ariko, if you can go over the members of the rabbit clan with Ichibo before I start summoning them, that would already be helpful. Both the female clone and the rabbit nodded in approval. The boy then looked around. Anything else anyone wants to bring up? A recommendation, if you will, the Sandaime said. Go ahead. The man rose. Since number aren't an issue, I'd suggest that there should always be a clone team close in case you need support. That way, if you 3 are taken out by surprise, a rescue group is at least close at hand. Yeah, Naruto said, dejected. I'd thought about that also. He didn't like the fact that he made things worse with bad decisions. Remember one thing, Iruka spoke up as he saw Naruto's face. You made it through. Sure, there were wrong choices and questionable actions, but the important part is that you made it, and can learn from it. He waved around. There isn't anybody here who never made a bad decision. That's just being human. But as long as it helps you improve, it's already that much earned, he said with a smile. He wasn't the only one. Both Jiraiya and Hiruzen nodded at that, similar smiles on their lips. Nothing more? Naruto finally said after a moment. Meeting adjourned. We'll be expecting reports from everyone on their tasks next week. Dismissed. The 3 adults instantly vanished, being clones, while the rest of the group quickly made their way downstairs. Naruto wasn't far behind. If he hurried, he might manage to reach Ichiraku before Tuchi closed shop. 11 days without Ichiraku ramen had been more than enough fasting, and he had a date with the largest bowl he could find. Prank day 184. Uzumaki, a voice said, coming from right behind him. Naruto turned away from his ramen to find Uchiha Sasuke coming his way. He nearly replied his usual team, but suddenly realized his former rival had actually used his name, and not one of insults he usually bandied about. Uchiha, he finally replied, unsure of what else to say. The dark-haired boy took that as an invitation, and sat down beside him at the counter. He even ordered a plate of tomatoes as he did so. Now even more confused, he released a burst of chakra, hoping to break whatever illusion he was under. No such luck. Just back from your first C rank from what I've heard, correct? Sasuke said between 2 slices of tomato, the great Uchiha doing normal conversation? Impossible. Naruto had to force himself not to check that the sky was falling. He simply nodded instead, taking another bite of his noodles. How was it for you? The Uchiha asked. For a second, Naruto didn't know what to say. The happenings in Fumotocho hadn't yet been released to the general public, and there was enough information under seal that he didn't know what to answer. You had your own C ranks, so I'm pretty sure you know the drill by now, he evasively replied instead. Sasuke looked up to the sky. Long, boring, and seemingly pointless? Naruto simply nodded, even though it hadn't been anything like that. I hear you. Naruto finished his bowl in silence while Sasuke snacked beside him. He was pretty sure this meeting wasn't a coincidence, and he wanted to get at the bottom of it. Thank you for the meal, he said to Ayam as he pushed back his bowl on the counter. Are you busy after this? Sasuke asked as soon as his bowl was gone. The blonde had expected a request like this one. Not particularly. He was headed down below for more training, but it wasn't anything pressing. and he was wondering what could have made Sasuke become civil out of the blue. "You up for a spar?" the Uchiha asked, smirking as he usually had. Naruto remembered that he'd hated that smirk, but now for some reason it didn't have the impact it had before. He thought for a moment. While he trained a lot, the number of people he'd sparred against was minimal. Outside his clones, only Iruka had been a frequent training partner. Add to that a few sessions with Ebisu, and that was the sum total of his sparring experience ever since he'd graduated. A new challenger might be a good reference point, especially one his age. Sure. What kind? Ninjutsu, Kenjutsu, Taijutsu? The smirk just grew. All of it. Some alarm bells started ringing in Naruto's mind. Why? He finally asked. I heard about your performance during the invasion, he answered, scowling somewhat. And that you were promoted because of it. I just wanted to know how I compared to that. Naruto was sure there was something else there, but he lost nothing in humoring his former classmate. Okay. When and where? He said, gesturing to his own lack of equipment. Sasuke thought for a moment. How about training ground 19 at 2? Naruto nodded. I'll be there. Good, Sasuke said with the slightest hint of a smile. He quickly ate the rest of his snack, paid for his meal and left. Naruto did the same. He had a little more than an hour to get ready, and he planned on being as prepared as he could. At the academy, Sasuke had always been one to go for victory at all costs, and Naruto wasn't planning on losing this one. Naruto wasn't the only one to have come prepared. The Uchiha had 2 more bandoliers of kunai and shuriken on his sides, along with what looked like a pocket full of explosive tags. He was stretching himself from left to right, preparing himself for quick movement. He stopped as soon as the blonde arrived within 4 paces of him. You need time to prepare? Naruto shook his head. He'd never need it, and he wasn't going to start now. Ready when you are, he answered with a smile. He had to agree that he was looking forward to this match. The Uchiha had won all spars they'd had at the academy, and it would be a good measure of his growth since then. Said Ninja withdrew a single kunai. We start when this touches the ground, okay? Naruto nodded. Sasuke threw the kunai high in the air, then took position. He did the same, and the two stuck to the pose for the couple of seconds it took for the kunai to reach the ground. When it did, Sasuke dashed forward instantly, then redirected his charge in an instant to come from the side. The blonde wasn't surprised. He'd done the same many times at the academy. He dodged the first 2 punches, rolled under the kick, then stepped back to evade a second one. 3 quick parries with his bakudo followed, as Sasuke launched a trio of kunai in quick succession. It was clear Sasuke was testing him, and he was doing the same. His former rival was faster than when they'd last fought, but he had no problem in keeping up with him. My turn, Naruto said, and it was he that charged this time. He launched himself in what was basically his 4th kata, and by the 3rd strike Sasuke had a kunai in hand to block the various strikes. Naruto didn't let the pressure fall. He even tried to place a punch in the middle, as Iruka had done on him, but the dark-haired boy noticed, flipping back at the last instant, and then he was blind. Genjutsu? Naruto wondered. He'd not seen Sasuke do the seals. Still, he needed to react. He stepped to the side to dodge the 3 shuriken he could hear coming, then swiped his blade straight at Sasuke once he could hear the boy was in range. By the sound the dark-haired boy had made, he hadn't been expecting that, and had thrown himself to the side to evade. This gave him enough time to make a Genjutsu dissipation seal. Kai, nice one, Naruto said as he turned to the rising Sasuke. The Uchiha had his serious face on, and his fingers were moving into seals. Seals he recognized, and his own fingers moved to counter. Katan, Gokakyu no Jutsu, Katan Akaraka Jugoki. The black sphere appeared just as Sasuke turned to exhale, and the flame he spat quickly vanished inside the darkness of the ball. What is that? He yelled. Like I'm gonna tell in the middle of combat, Naruto replied, shifting the sphere to his offhand and pulling his sword up once more. Had enough? The Uchiha scowled. No. He launched a brace of shuriken with his answer, and dashed toward the trees that surrounded their practice area. Like most training grounds in Konoha, Area 19 was surrounded on 3 sides by woods. Sasuke quickly disappeared into those, vanishing into the underbrush. Rushing to the edge of the forested area, Naruto stopped to listen, trying to sense his foe. As usual, Sasuke was good. There wasn't a sound out of place, and he couldn't feel his sparring partner anywhere. It was the perfect setup for an ambush or a trap, and he knew how to deal with those. Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. A wave of clones rushed forward, and Naruto made sure to follow as if he was one of the many clones. His black ball changed hands to a clone on his left, and a few more Hellfire spheres appeared in the group, summoned by the clones. And that happened just in time, as a number of smaller fireballs shot outwards from deeper in the woods. Spread out! He yelled as two of the clones with spheres rushed forward. The flames were quickly absorbed, but the shuriken they hid weren't, and the two bunched in burst as their spheres exploded at the contact. Another wave of clones replaced them, but by now Sasuke had clearly changed position. Sasuke Uchiha forced himself not to pant as he hid in the trees, having just done a quick shunshin after a fireball. Around him, he could hear the many Narutos slowly canvassing the place, looking for his position. It had been at least 15 minutes since he'd entered the forest, and they hadn't let up. He was tiring. He knew his reserves were greater than most genin, especially after Kakashi's grueling training, but he was still running out of chakra. He was also down to 3 kunai, and less than half his tags. His shuriken were long gone, and Naruto was now wise to most of his tricks, which never worked twice. Whatever he thought of the boy in the past, he couldn't deny that this wasn't the dead last he'd faced at the academy. His sword work was tight and effective, even in a wooded area where obstacles were everywhere. His reactions were fast, and he knew how to use his jutsu well. Even by sneak attack, his clones took 3 or 4 hits before they went down, and by now they went everywhere in teams of 3, cutting down that option. Kakashi had been right. Unless they made a mistake, taking on those trios was a losing proposition. He couldn't see how he could win this one. It hurt inside to admit, but he was losing. And worse was, even if he managed to win, it would be more luck than anything, and it wouldn't satisfy him. Naruto had taken all he could deal, and had come out on top. It was, a squirrel dropped down on the branch he was hiding on, and he kicked it near instantly as he reacted. The beast disappeared in a burst of smoke, and he knew he was found. Shit! He did a quick shunshin 4 meters away, only for a quartet of what he supposed were clones to appear instantly around him. Grabbing 2 kunai, he rushed the closest, who managed to block or dodge the first 7 strikes. The 8th burst him, but he found himself surrounded by clones holding explosive tags at chest height. "You're out, Sasuke," Naruto's voice came from deeper in the woods. Fubaku Hajin. He didn't know the technique, but the arm tags were bad enough. He supposed he had enough for another pair of shushin, but outside of that he was dry. And he didn't think he could manage a reversal. "I surrender," he spat out, grimacing. He let his kunai drop from his hands as he said so. The clones did a couple of seals before removing the tags, and they stepped back as another Naruto came forward. "Good spar," the Naruto said, and Sasuke suspected it was the original. "I lost," the Uchiha spat out, as if it explained everything. "Yeah, and?" Naruto countered. "I know I learned a lot from this spar. That hiding shuriken and fireballs trick, it was great, and you might have gotten me with it if you'd used it earlier." "Good for you," the Uchiha growled out. "You can't tell me you learned nothing from this spar," Naruto countered. "Yeah, like what?" Sasuke said, looking down at his training partner. Said Blonde raised a single finger. "Well, you at least know what to work on. First, you clearly need better endurance," he pointed out, then raised a second finger. "Your speed at hand seals is good, so a quick jutsu for close range would be a good addition. Third finger. Some trap training might be useful, also. It probably wouldn't have worked on me, since it's one of my specialties. But you could have made that forest a lot more difficult to hunt you in, and your talent with wires makes it a natural progression of your skill set. Fourth. Some blind fighting training might be useful, also. I could tell you used mostly your eyes for sensing, and since you're an Uchiha, that's a big flaw." "That's all?" Sasuke replied, clearly unhappy. "And where would I find such a jutsu?" "Well, your sensei is Kakashi of 1,000 jutsu, so I'm pretty sure he has at least 1 or 2 that fit those criteria," Naruto countered. "Now you want another match?" "Nah," Sasuke replied, ambling away from the training ground, going straight for home. He didn't need to be hammered into the ground once more, and, judging by how tired he was, he wouldn't be giving his best anyway. "See you, then," Naruto replied cheerfully. "Come again for another spar someday." Yeah. His head was down, and he was stuck in his thoughts all the way back to the Uchiha district. He felt like he'd fallen back miles from being ready to face his brother. If the so-called dead last could beat him after less than a year, how much behind was he, and how could he ever catch up to Itachi? Clearly, Kakashi wasn't helping him improve fast enough if Naruto could have so easily passed him. He needed more, but who else could he go to for training? Prank Day 187. Tora sat down on the pillow reserved for him in the underground chamber that Jin Shippuden never left. Behind him were the rest of the leaders of the Taurus, and, each seated in his own spot. Before him, on her throne-like chair, was the Lord Jin herself, with her two most loyal retainers beside her. So, the Lord said, her voice firm. How goes our people, there? Tora started, his head bowed. There hasn't been a change, Jin-sama. While the Torisan have been guarding the city and there have been no serious altercations. A few drunks here and there. The people are still fearful and reticent. Shops are empty at near all times, and the streets are deserted. It is clear that they don't believe the Yakuza are gone, only that this is the calm before the storm, and they hide as if it was soon to come. Outside of the Yakuza themselves being captured, I do not think this will change any time soon. Disappointing, the Lord replied. And how goes finding them? We do have some leads, Jin-sama, but everything points toward the bulk of our enemies not being in the city at the moment, Tora replied. Moreover, we've heard rumors of a meeting, which might explain why they are gone. There were infiltrators as rats and mice in the few shops they'd discovered were Yakuza fronts, but these were nearly abandoned with only a few members still inside, and no one that could be termed leadership. There are a few businesses that we've identified as Yakuza fronts, but these are silent as any, and we've found nothing illegal when searched. Any person we could use as a source of information? She asked. Tora shook his head. None, Jin-sama. Whoever was left behind is either an unmarked member or hired help, and wouldn't be high enough in the ranks to have important information. So we are waiting. Sadly, yes, Jin-sama, Tora answered. There is no crime we can crack down on in the city, and outside sending troops to seek our enemies, there is not much more we can do. Shippu inclined her head. Should we do that? No, Tora instantly replied, shaking his head. The members of the Torisan behind him did the same, echoing his thoughts. It may be exactly what our enemies are waiting for. Like the population of the city, I do not believe this is over. Splitting our forces would only help our enemies if they returned. He didn't say that they'd already done exactly that. While the official members of the Torisan stayed in Jincho, there were Naruto clones going all over the peninsula. Numbers were their strength, and they'd use it as much as possible. It hadn't given any results yet, but they were sure it would. Question was, would it be in time?